And welcome to the City Council's work study session for March 21st, 2019, here in the Harry E. Mitchell Government Center. For the first items on the agenda is the call to the audience for the issue review session and committee of the whole items. Audience members have up to 3 minutes to address the City Council. If you would like to speak on an item, please fill out a speaker's card, which can be found in the back of the council chambers, and hand it to our city clerk. I'll call your name when it is your turn to speak. Is there anyone in the audience? I do not have any cards. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to address us on any of the items on the work study session? Could you please get my attention, or the issue review session? Seeing none, I'll close that portion and move on to item number 2, which is the initial recommended 5-year CIP. Who's going to come on up? Oh, wait. Well, the first one I have on the agenda is the 5-year CIP, but I could take the aquatics first. Aquatics I have is item D. Unless you have a different agenda than I do. I think it's good to do the CIP first. Yeah, let's do the aquatics first.
Wait till they get down and see you.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Keith Burke, Community Services Director. With me tonight is Sean Wagner, Community Services Manager for the Kiwanis Recreation Center and the aquatics programs. Tonight we're providing an update on some of the aquatic facility capital improvement projects and seeking council direction for the McClintock Pool Community Center and the aquatic facilities options for Clark Park. The aquatic facility CIP primarily supports the quality of life strategic priority and performance measure 3.16, which relates to the quality of our community facilities. The aquatics capital improvement program provides funding necessary to rehabilitate and replace facility assets that are no longer functional or at the end of their life cycle. McClintock Pool is currently under construction, and Sean will now go into more detail about the status of that project, as well as the efforts to identify a new Clark Park aquatic facility.
Thanks, Keith. The scope of work at the McClintock swimming pool includes the replacement of the out-of-service kiddie pool with an shaded accessible splash pad with water play features, and the installation of a water slide, as well as correcting ADA deficiencies and sidewalk in the parking lot and the sidewalk. McClintock Pool is on track for its public summer season on Saturday, May 25th. In recent years, there has been discussion regarding the replacement of the current building with a new community center using development impact fees to offset a portion of this project cost. Upon further review and consideration, staff is proposing the current facility be renovated and not replaced with a community center. Since the location of this facility is on the McClintock High School campus, public access to a new community center would be restricted throughout the year. Renovations would include improvements to the showers, restrooms, guard room, and the office. If this direction is approved, the development impact fees could be appropriated to another qualified community center project at Clark Park, for example. This location would provide greater public access to the facility and could help meet some of the identified space needs for the community programs and meetings. In the next few slides, I will be presenting information regarding the Clark Park aquatic facility. Early last year, we presented the results of the Aquatic Needs Assessment Study. This completed study is a roadmap that was developed to meet the current and future needs of the city's aquatic facilities. Following council direction, staff surveyed the Clark Park neighborhood and surrounding community to gather additional feedback on the type of facility desired for their park. A service gap was identified in the northwest portion of the city as a part of the Aquatic Needs Assessment Study. Clark Park was identified as an ideal spot due to its location, population density, and access to public transportation. Previously, there was a pool in this area that included 6 25-meter lap lanes with a dive tank and a separate kiddie pool. Today, a neighborhood pool typically consists of a main pool approximately 25 yards in length with 6 to 8 lanes for fitness swimming and instructional programming, such as swim lessons and water fitness. It may also accommodate other community organizations, such as the Tempe High School swim team. A few spray features and slides are integrated into the pool design to allow for multi-generational use as well. Tempe's Escalante pool is a great example of a neighborhood aquatic facility. With the assistance of the park staff and neighborhood services team, residents within a 2-mile radius of Clark Park were invited to participate in public involvement. This included neighborhood meetings and an online survey. During the outreach process, 152 surveys were received. Public outreach efforts for these meetings included the city website, online postings, email blast, social media notification, as well as an information table at the Clark Park Farmers Market. 149 of the 152 responses were collected when asking the community if they would like to see an aquatic facility at Clark Park. 87% of those respondents indicated they would like to see some type of aquatic facility. Of the 129 responses that indicated they would like to see an aquatic facility, 81% desired a pool, 11% chose a splash playground, and 8% preferred a splash pad. Only 31% of the respondents have access to a private pool facility, and less than 20% have a pool at their residence. Participants were also asked to rank in order of importance the top 3 amenities and/or services they would like to see available at Clark Park. The top 5 were public swimming, shade, lap swimming, swimming lessons, and aquatic fitness classes. As you can see, 4 out of the 5 top responses are pool related. Based on the data collected during the community outreach, there is substantial support for a neighborhood pool. A neighborhood pool would require greater allocations of funds for construction as well as continuing operations. It would also have a greater impact on the existing park amenities due to the space necessary for its construction. In fact, staff would recommend assessing the park in its entirety to maximize the use of available resources and minimize the park downtime due to construction. This would include possibly relocating and/or replacing existing park amenities such as the community garden, recreation center, restrooms, playgrounds, and ramadas, in addition to addressing on-site parking. If there is direction to build a pool in the next 6 to 10 years, this project would require an update to the city's CIP forecast that would reassess the other parks projects identified in the CIP as a part of the entire planning process. At this time, I will turn it back over to Keith.
Thank you, Sean. So tonight we are seeking council direction on the McClintock Community Center and the Clark Park Facility CIP projects. If approved, the McClintock Community Center CIP would adjust to a McClintock pool building renovation, allowing the development impact fees to be reassigned to a different community center project. Additionally, we are seeking direction on the type of aquatic facility to build at Clark Park. And as Sean mentioned, we would recommend incorporating a master park design which would look at the best possible layout for aquatic facility within and around the other park amenities. This concludes our presentation. We'll answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
So I appreciate the flexibility and thinking kind of outside the box and kind of really understanding the use of McClintock and how we're going to be able to do that for our community. The one thing, though, I don't want to leave us short is, I mean, that building's really old at McClintock, and obviously it does need to be updated and modernized. I don't want to see you allocate all that other money somewhere else without the ability to do that. And then especially making sure that we have good viewing areas for people that are there for swim lessons or the competitions that are going to be going on at McClintock. Can you talk a little bit about what I can expect to see or what my residents can expect to see within the facility if we do allocate those money somewhere else? What kind of upgrades are we talking about?
Well, if we change the project to a renovation, it's mainly going to contain construction around the bathhouses, the locker rooms, and improving the lifeguard room and the coach's room up top. We really wouldn't add viewing rooms to the existing building.
Not viewing rooms. I'm talking about like benches and places for families to be able to watch their kids have swim lessons.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can do
that.
I know we have the bleachers, and that's pretty much all that's ever been there.
Yeah.
Nothing else outside of that.
Most of the concentration would fall within the facility itself as far as the locker rooms and the entranceway and updating that building that's
Is that like new paint, new floor, what?
New floors, new showers, a total renovation, because basically we put new lockers in last year, but basically total renovation because we still have our old
Right.
shower types that are not individual kind of privacy areas, so we're trying to kind of update those to modern times.
Definitely needs a little updating, that's for sure. I just want to make sure that we finish that project, right? And we feel good about the project and not leave one piece of it undone. So, to me, as long as you're comfortable with the modernization, I mean, I think it's a great idea to be able to reallocate those dollars, and I definitely don't have an issue with that.
I just want to comment, I am in favor of the staff's recommendation for, using the impact fees for the renovation of the McClintock facility. I think we're already there. I agree with what you're saying.
The only thing that we do there is if we take the community center out of that element at McClintock, the impact fees would have to be reassigned somewhere else.
Right.
So as long as that's okay to do that?
Okay. I'm in favor of that. Anybody else have any other questions on McClintock before we jump into Clark?
Okay. No.
Councilman Granville?
I'll just add, I swim at the McClintock pool with my tri-club probably once every 2 or 3 weeks, even though I should do it twice a week. And I totally agree. It's like what you imagine like a really old, rundown sort of high school locker room to look like. It's not up to the standards that we would expect. So it makes perfect sense. I think it's money well spent. I think it'll draw more people into the pool as well.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else on McClintock? Okay. Any other on Clark? Councilman Navarro?
Thank you, Mayor. Question on Clark, and I was kind of just thinking about this today. You guys see this as a regional type of location or a neighborhood type of location? Because when we talk about the comparison of Escalante, the thing that pops out is Escalante seems to have, it does serve the neighborhood, but it has the Kiwanis atmosphere, the big gym, the lot of other breakout rooms, things like that, where Clark it seems more of a neighborhood if we're going that direction. So is the plan to kind of downsize a little bit to the neighborhood's needs and not make it a regional?
The Clark facility would just be aquatic, so we wouldn't have a gymnasium similar to Escalante or anything of that nature. It would be meant for the neighborhood, but as anything we build, we do attract from other cities because they're quality programs and others from outside do come to utilize the space. But it would be a neighborhood type program first.
Right, and I guess the magnitude of that, yeah, and that's probably with the council, I guess, on this one, the magnitude, I can understand the need at Clark. It serves that area and things like that, but if we're attracting, other cities, then we're probably doing some real grandiose things versus maybe not so grandiose things, but we do serve the community within. And it's just food for thought, I guess.
Well, to that point, it's interesting because I learned to swim at both McClintock and Clark, and I remember going to Clark Park for Parks and Rec programs and the little facility that's there. But remind me if I'm wrong, that was built like in the early 70s, so it's like 73, 74?
Clark was in the mid-60s.
Yes.
Clark was in mid-60s, okay. Different time then versus now. I mean, that was before Kiwanis Park was built, before McClintock Pool was built, and it really was more of a neighborhood park, the way it was set up in the parking. I think it would be wise for us, if we're going to be looking at the type of amenities that you're talking about, we don't have adequate parking there. We're going to have a whole reconfiguration and plan. So was there any thought process on discussing a master planning that park to fit? Because instead of just putting propping a pool in there, and there's going to be some challenges with parking. There is now, as we speak, even with the Little League field there.
That's the direction we would like to go in, is look at a master design for the park. There are other projects through our Parks CIP program that are on schedule for the next few years that we'd like to coordinate with and kind of look at it all together as a wholesome view.
Jennifer? Councilmember Adams?
Yes, I want us to be mindful that 81% of the residents in that area want a pool, and that was their first choice, so I want to point that out. Second is also that research shows that there should be one pool for every 25,000 residents in a city our size, and we don't have that without having Clark Park at pool in that location. And third is safety. When children learn how to swim, and quite frankly even adults learn how to swim, there's a big safety factor with having them not drown. So I think that that's really important. And I would like us to revisit how we can get Clark Park Pool up in the green zone from the staff's recommendations. I would like to see it move up into the green zone. I met with a lot of those residents in that area, and they really want a pool, and oftentimes their yards aren't large enough to have their own pool. And I think we're doing a disservice by not having a pool for that neighborhood.
Councilman, Vice Mayor Kiwi?
Thanks so much. Just looking at the chart of the suggested priorities for our CIP, and I know that Clark Park comes out number 130. It's the first in the red zone. But curiously, the point system is 12 points. So why doesn't it fall right under 13, which would move it up in the green zone to be 114? Am I missing something?
Thank you, Councilmember Cubey. Ken Jones, Deputy City Manager. With the original scoring, the points came out that way, and we fit everything in the green that we could. Moving Clark up into the green took us way over the amount that we could get. We were trying to stay within a certain dollar amount, and that would have added $15 million. So the projects that you see that scored lower than that are up above it, we severely reduced those. So let me look at my list and I'll give you an example. So I want to address Councilmember Cubey's point directly. So for instance, there are two things that scored 10. There's a Tempe, a Hardy Police substation renovation that was scored a 10 when it was a big renovation. We scaled that back to where they were only addressing the issues that needed to immediately be replaced, and then we moved it up into the green. We should have rescored that after that. We left the original scoring. That was a mistake on our part. The same thing for the one right below that, which is the Fire Medical Rescue Facilities threat mitigation. They had put in a large request for dollars to put fencing around a lot of different fire stations and things that we thought were not immediately as necessary as other things that scored higher. But what they did was said, over here in the station that's getting pelted by things from the high rise that are getting thrown onto the station, can we at least have enough funding to protect our public and our firefighters in that station? We reduced it to that amount so that they could address that immediate need, and then we moved it up into the green. That's why those two low scoring got moved up ahead. Is that what you were referring to?
Sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for the explanation. I mean, it still remains as an outlier, and I realize it's probably because of the large cost, but like Councilmember Adams, I really see this as crucial to our CIP, maybe not for the next year's CIP. I understand there has to be a lot of planning, but you know, we in our role as council members and formally as candidates, we get out there and I know you've had public meetings. The public meetings have shown a strong interest in the pool, but having knocked doors in that neighborhood just thoroughly over 2 elections, I know that is a simmering kind of resentment in that community because they were kind of promised something that didn't get delivered. And I know there were a lot of reasons for doing that, and it happened in a time when the budget was under severe distress. I think people understood that, but they always thought it was going to be coming in the future. And I know that there are so many needs, but I also see a number of, say, transportation CIPs that are using the general obligation bonds, whereas maybe those things could get in line as a transportation need, and the general obligation bond money could be freed up to do, you know, a pool, essentially a renovation, because this was a pool and it was, you know, closed down. But this is a facility that we closed. It's not necessarily just a new facility. It's really a renovation of a facility that was closed down. So in my mind, it doesn't classify as brand new because it was there. And I also think we need to think creatively, not just with the CIP, but there's a potential for naming rights or working with any of the sports teams in the Valley and seeing what interest there might be there. And looking at maybe partnerships with Tempe Union High School District if there's interest in sharing any of that space and using any of that space together. But you know, I don't want to push that it has to be the next year's CIP. I realize we need to plan for this, but it seems to me we hear the voices of the public in our ear all the time, and I just can't ignore that this is a pressing need for the community. And it's not just about a facility, it's about building community. It's about saving lives because people learn to swim there, kids learn to swim there, and as far as the parking goes, that would add an extra cost, but we could accept and design this pool to be more of a community center pool. Most people will be walking there, or we can presume that, and put parking in later if we have to. But to me, a community-grounded pool that will build community, save lives, and kind of restore a little bit of the trust in this situation is something really needed in the 5-year CIP.
I just want to, and I don't disagree with anything that's been said. And I think us as council members and having an affinity for Clark Park Pool as well as McClintock, because I grew up, I swam there. I know this is a very much needed and desired amenity. And we also identified a service gap when it comes to aquatics based on the presentation. And I think it's important that when we look at this, we need to look at it in its entirety. Right here, we have before us our whole CIP budget for the next 5 years. We have 185,000 plus residents that we have a lot of needs and services for. And you're going to hear this later on in tonight's presentation, the fact that there's $138 million that we have cut from our CIP that Ken's going to allude to, because we just don't have some of the services and we have some deferred maintenance. So if we look at right now, it's important, and I agree, I think it's important we did the survey, but how we ask the questions with the survey is just as important, and master planning is just as important to make sure we get it right as well. Because of the 149 people that said yeah, and of that 81% said they want the pool, but what they asked for, would you want the pool knowing that something is going to get moved off of our CIP budget because we only have X amount of dollars? And that's something I think that we need to have a conversation about, because if we move $16 million into this 5-year CIP, something up here is going to have to get moved and cut out. And looking at the surveys that we've done, listening to the citizen satisfaction survey, and listening to, the stat model that we did in the services, that's something that comes into play as well. And not discounting everything on here is important. And I thought our staff did a good job moving a lot of stuff with cutting $138 million out of the CIP, what was requested, to fit as much as we can in a 5-year CIP. I think that's important. And knowing if our residents knew, okay, we're going to move the pool up, but we're going to get less than this. And also we have over $27 million in deferred maintenance in our city facilities. So there's a lot of stuff that we're moving that it's going to be moving around. Not to mention, even if we move it, we have to go out to our bond election in November of 2020 to reauthorize our bonding capacity, which could be put for public, amenities like this, because we can ask our public, this is where we're looking at it. We need to extend our bond authority. I just want us to really think about this, because that's when you have the whole master planning side of it. Because if it's what was once there, it's different today than it was back in the 1970s and mid to late 60s in terms of what types of uses are there. And we have 149 people that took a survey, and it's important. We also have 185,000 residents that we have to look at for our entire CIP project that we move forward. Just something for us to think about and chew on. Councilmember Arredondo.
Mayor, I don't think any of us disagree with that. We realize, and when something's in the red, something in the green's got to go, or to give. So I completely understand that. But a couple things, first and foremost. I kind of want to set the record straight in regards to Clark Park Pool, because I don't think it's like an addition or an amenity that hasn't always been there. The reason it's not there is because we let it deteriorate. We have to take responsibility for that. So I feel like it's, part of my responsibility to make sure that we do put a pool back in there, like the 152 people that said 81% of those said that's what they wanted. They wanted a pool. Now, I think we need to have a conversation of what a neighborhood pool is. I think before we start talking about what comes out of the green and goes from the red to the green is what exactly would be appropriate for that area. Because is it something like Escalante? Is it something a little bit smaller? Does it really have to be $60 million? Can we get it to around 10? I think before we start moving from red to green, that we really need to kind of identify what would really be appropriate and a really good fit for the Clark neighborhood. So I'm definitely willing to have that conversation. I'm willing to go and look at the green and see what we can move, or maybe move to another year. But I really want to narrow down the ability for us to understand how much money it's going to cost and how much we're going to need to move. So I think a really good exercise for us would be to understand what a neighborhood pool would look like, what the residents really want, and I think what's feasible within our budget. But I do feel like it's our responsibility to put Clark Pool back in service.
Agreed. And with that being said, that's where the master planning comes in, to find out what is a neighborhood pool. what would that look like for a neighborhood? Councilman Granville?
Thank you, Mayor. A couple things. The first one is I agree with Councilmember Arredondo Savage. And this is going to sound maybe really rudimentary, but I just need to see some pictures. I mean, I know what Escalante looks like. I know what Kiwanis looks like. I know, what McClintock looks like. And I also know what a backyard pool looks like. I can't fathom that a backyard pool is a $16 million pool, right? Even at city rates. And so there must be something different about it. And so I think what would be helpful for me to make sort of that neighborhood pool idea and get a better sense is to say, look, this is what we meant by this dollar amount. This is what we meant by one factor up, and this is what we meant by one factor down. Because a neighborhood pool is not McClintock pool, right? That is a 50-meter pool meant for tournaments, all of that. The other thing I would say, to go to the mayor's point, I would support putting a pool as one of the things as our next bond, right? And let residents say, like, look, if you want a pool, it's cool. You just got to understand you're going to pay for it. But that wasn't, in my understanding, part of what this bond set of requests were. So I understand that the language is broad enough it could fit into that, but I think drawing that distinction in an actual bonding initiative would make a little more sense to me. And then the third thing I would say is it's hard for me to say we need a new facility when, for the public, when the facilities we have are so relatively limited in their use for the public. So I was just pulling up some quick stats. So if you look at McClintock Pool, even in the summer months, the open swim is only 6 to 9 p.m. at night. That's it. That's all. That's the full open swim time. And so if you're saying, well, the problem is we need more time for residents to swim. Well, I know where that time can come from. It can come from before 6 p.m. But then, of course, the response would be, well, we have meets and we have tournaments and we have schools and we have, and maybe that's part of the discussion we need to have. If we want a resident swimming pool, then maybe we need to talk about the priority of usage of our existing pools. Escalante, by the way, is only from 1 to 5 p.m. for the public in the summer months. And Kiwanis isn't even open on Sunday in the summer months. And so if we're talking about residents having access to the pools, it doesn't make sense to me to say, let's go build another golf course, but our current golf course is only open from 1 to 5 p.m. It would make a lot more sense to say we want more golfing, let's extend the hours of the golf courses we've got. And so I think that's the discussion we should have even in the interim, because whatever the discussion of the majority is with Clark Park Pool, clearly there's a desire by residents to have more availability. And whatever happens is going to be 3 to 5 years out at best. And so if it's an immediate need, I don't see why you would wait for a long-term solution.
Councilman Navarro and then Vice Mayor Kuby.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and I think that's the whole conversation is what I was alluding to is where could we possibly shrink the price to still have a quality neighborhood pool, to still also have a quality neighborhood pool that is going to entice and invite people to use the facilities down there. Obviously, I don't think anyone can disagree with pool safety and trying to get lessons and things like that. But we also got, with our master plan, I love the fact that we're still going to reach out and try to get like a better idea of what we're trying to gauge to. And I think it'd probably help us, at this level we can get this level, and this level we can get this, A, B, and C. But with that too is what are projections, because I know that we've had discussions even on the McClintock pool during the summertime pool use. We had a 50-meter pool, but we really didn't have any amenities there to attract people to use the pool. So it's a combination of both. And I know we're going to probably have that information just to make sure that we're producing something that has attractiveness to it and has usability to it. So it has multiple functions. And even on the off season, it has the ability to do those off training things like that. So I know staff's going to bring that, but I think that's very important.
Vice Mayor Kuby.
Just in response to what you were saying, Councilmember Granville, agree with much of what you said, but the Escalante and McClintock pool are not an option for kids in the Clark Park neighborhood or a young mom who wants to take her kids swimming and don't want to have to get on the bus and drive. And a neighborhood pool has a specific context and meaning, and it has specific historical context to that neighborhood because it was pretty much a community center and a center of, a lot of people's childhoods. So that was my meaning, like the geography and the context is really important here.
Yes. Then Councilmember Adams.
I get your point. I think that's the conversation that I think is the more interesting one in some ways, is what the people of around Clark Park, I think, are saying is not that we need another pool in Tempe, it's that we need another pool I can walk to. And I don't think it's our obligation, it might be our historic obligation in this location, I think that's a separate discussion, but I don't think it's our obligation to have a pool everyone can walk to.
You're misreading, you're completely misreading what I said. Can you go back to the map that you showed us originally? So we've identified that there are severe gaps, geographic gaps in the pools. It's not like everyone will have a pool they can walk to, but there's a definite gap and a service gap in Northwest Tempe, and it actually corresponds with one of the poorer areas, generally the Northwest in Tempe as well. So that was my point.
Councilmember Adams?
Yes, I completely agree with what Councilmember Kuby is saying about this area and the map. It's very easy to see that we're missing a pool there. And we did have a pool there at one time, as everyone knows, but we really didn't take care of the pool and keep it up. I think if we would have had proper maintenance on the pool, we would have been able to keep the pool, obviously with major improvements, but part of that is our responsibility for not keeping it up. Also, for the general site conditions that I have for the pool, it's looking like $5.6 million for the pool. So you guys do have some idea about what the pool is looking like, or you wouldn't have this number. So can you give us a little description about what you have?
Mayor, if I could, just for a second. By the way, we really appreciate the input. This is exactly what we need. And when we get to the CIP, we'll be able to talk more about how we can satisfy your request and try to squeeze it in the green. But before we do that, I know that these two gentlemen are prepared tonight to give you estimates of what we could get the cost down to, but what that means. So when you talk about, is it ever going to be a competition pool? Will it have the availability of lanes? That drives cost. Is it going to be used in the winter so that we have to plummet for heating? That drives cost. Is it going to have a slide? Is it going to have play features? That drives cost. And they're prepared to tell you what's in the $15 million estimate. And my understanding is that it's very similar to what's in the pool, not the facility at Escalante, but the pool at Escalante. That's what's in the 15, I believe. They can clarify. But so to Councilmember Adams' point, before we get to the CIP item tonight, let's have them explain to you clearly what the low end is that we could possibly spend to get a pool built there, a neighborhood pool, and what that would mean versus the $15 million that's in there, so we know what we're trying to squeeze in before we get to the CIP.
Thank you. Councilman Adams, just to answer your question in reference to our estimates and the $5.6 million that we kind of put in for construction was modeled after the Escalante pool, just a little bit smaller. So it did have the zero depth play feature to allow for multi-generational ages, toddlers, seniors to utilize that space with just zero beach effect. Along with the 6 lap lanes. Escalante has 8, but this one will be a little bit smaller. And then but we also included the slide similar to Escalante as itself. So that's kind of where we've summarized that $5.6 million, including a heater for Clark Park Pool to have more year-round operations for more swimming time for the community, whereas Escalante, we do not have a heater. So that's why it's only open over the summer at Escalante, because it's not heated. So that's something that we put into that budget moving forward.
Have you looked at solar for Clark Park Pool?
These are just conceptual estimates that were given to us by the architects that are currently working for us now for the other pools that we're doing work on. The solar could be a possibility moving forward. These are just estimates. We have no plans, but that would be drawn out in plans once we move forward with a decision as far as what's going to be built. And the architects will be able to build that in as options and seeing if there's ways to save money and be a little bit more efficient, working with Braden and his team on sustainability into the project.
So if I could.
So the solar, just if I want to just one more, would add 3 months of life as far as heat to the pool, and it would probably be around $25,000 to install. Just I happen to know about these things, and so I just wanted to point that out to look at the solar option, please.
We do have it budgeted in the budget, but as far as the plans and exactly what it would be, that would be up to the architects and trying to get something for us that would work for the project.
Okay, thank you.
So Mayor, my understanding is that this plan includes demolition of the existing pool, demolition of the existing building, repair of the parking lot to make it ADA accessible, because you're going to have people that are going to have to drive there and park to go to, everybody isn't going to be able to walk. We have to have ADA accessibility in the parking lot to get to the pool. So those types of things are built in here. And if I could just ask Keith, could you just tell us, if we just wanted the neighborhood pool with the least amount of amenities possible, what price can we get this down to?
Thank you, Ken. If we made adjustments where we no longer had a community garden in that park, if we just took the current footprint of where Clark Park was before and just put a new pool in that location, we would be roughly about $10 million as far as what we came down to, as far as making adjustments and not thinking about any other amenities in that location, not returning with a community garden, not touching any other stuff that's already there in that park.
Robin?
Not really sure. In regards to location and putting it over the old Clark pool, does that mean that the community garden goes away? I mean, that's what I mean, I think we have to have that conversation too, because
Our original pricing of the 15 million would include relocation of the pool in a different location or relocating the garden somewhere else in the park. We took that into consideration when trying to price this all out, knowing what the community wanted.
okay, so basically the priority is the pool.
Priority is the pool.
That was the feedback, so you need, okay.
So,
Councilor, Vice Mayor Cubey?
But since you'll be doing a study of the entire park, are there possibly other areas in the park where the pool could be put anew and you wouldn't have to have the demolition costs of the old pool and deal with all the underground piping and infrastructure?
there will be some trade-off, but if we move the pool to a different location than the current garden, it might be where the recreation center is, where the basketball courts are, where the playground is. So some of those things might have to be moved around to make room for a new pool outside of the current footprint where the old pool was, which is the community garden. So we would have to, juggle that up to figure out.
We shouldn't assume that it's going to be where the garden is and where the old pool was. There could be another place within that. And the neighborhood may want to say, okay, get rid of the dog park. We'd rather have a pool. I mean, there's a lot of discussion to happen. I realize this is complicated, but since I've been on council, I know we've been talking about it, and I feel like it gets pushed back. It's like, we can't do this, but I just want to find, how can we do this?
How can we do it?
How can we do it? Give us a route, and we're the ones setting priorities. We're giving you all the hard work, but I sense that we have the priority to look at this somewhere in the CIP in the next 5 years. I'm just saying, what can we do? How can we do this?
And do those costs also include the operations? Now, that's some of the challenges we have with the current hours of our current pools, is staffing it. And then you also have the recurring O&M. So when looking at a project like this with a new pool that's similar to Escalante, do we know what the cost would be that would be reoccurring for a budget standpoint?
Sure, and I'll let Sean go ahead and jump into that.
'Cause I just know like some of the hours are the way they are is because of staffing and some of in the summertime, even because of other events at the competition pool at McClintock, but knowing where we are at Escalante, that's why I'm asking that.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Originally, we expect this from an operating standpoint to be open an average of 10 hours for 304 days, and that's where that $900,000 recurring operating came from. Since then, we've been able to go back and take a look and do some modifications to that, just really looking at potentially reducing some of the hours and expanding in the summer season, having much more available because that's when folks are usually looking to be there. But then in the what we would consider fall, winter, and spring, being able to pull that back a little. With some adjustments there, we were able to get that down to around $550,000 as far as recurring operating, and that includes utilities, O&M expenses, as well as any salaries or wages as well. So we were able to just identify some efficiencies within operations, moving forward.
Okay. Councilman Adams?
So if we didn't do as big a pool, could we do it probably at around 10 million instead of the 15 million?
We would make adjustments and figure out how that would work within the pool, and we'd take into consideration what we can do for that amount and whether the garden can stay or not stay. That would be the discussion that we'd have to have moving forward with engineering and looking at the total cost.
Okay, I think that would be great, so we can look at.
I didn't know it was either or.
Well, it's just still laying out that master park. We can get a design and kind of have a look at it, but that's how we based our original 15. If we,
That's what I was suggesting with planning it. Councilmember Keating?
Thank you, Mayor. I like the suggestion of maybe a smaller pool at a lesser price tag. If it could still be a community and a regional pool, for $10 million as opposed to 15, I definitely think that's the way to go, particularly looking at just how stretched our CIP budget is.
Mr. Mayor, in terms of parameters and thinking about what a smaller pool would be, is it the pleasure of council for us to look at the footprint of the original pool as a basis perhaps to think about that? Because while it wasn't the size of the existing McClintock pool, it was a diving facility. There was a dive board there, and my understanding is that Tempe High School used to use that as their aquatic facility at one point. So it may not have had the same footprint as the existing pool at McClintock, but it was deep, and it did serve for the purpose of swim meets and dive meets. So is that a basis to look? When you say smaller, it'd be nice to have some more definition to what that looks like.
Yes, and before we go there, I mean, I think it's important we have an amenity there. Obviously, the slide that you have up, it shows a aquatic needs assessment, that there is a gap there, and I think we're trying to find a solution for that. I would err that we build on the lesser expensive side. I'm not saying have the Taj Mahal, but I'm saying what's important is you don't want to build something that's not going to be able to fit the needs of the service area, because that's a pretty large service area. So you don't want to underbuild it just for the sake of underbuilding it. And for me, if we're going to do this, which I think we agree that there's a need there, let's do it right. Let's take the time to plan it and put that commitment, but we need to put some timelines on it so that our residents know that, yep, this is in the cycle, this is in the plan. And then it's going to be up to us, because we're going to have to make that tough decision, the next topic on our agenda, as how we're going to handle and juggle the CIP. So I think if that's where we're heading as a council, I would rather build it properly and correctly with the feedback of the neighbors, and make sure that we're not going to underbuild it, because that would be the worst thing that we could do, is underbuild something when we have a high demand for this area. Councilman Navarro, then Councilman Graham.
Mayor, thank you. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's what I was kind of trying to allude to when you guys go back to the neighborhood and just trying to take and digest all the stuff that we're saying here. Is there a better, smaller way or a better fit that we can do that? But to that point, and like I said, you want to make it attractive. It's got to have some attractiveness to it to make people want to go there and utilize it and stuff like that. So I'm going to leave it to you guys. You guys are going to go back and just kind of get a gauge on the neighborhood, and maybe even a gauge on the different location if that even works out.
But the question is, where is that going to fit in the CIP? That's the bigger question. I mean, we could say we want them to go back, we want staff to go back to the neighborhood, where this location of the pool is going to be. I know there was a plan done years ago. We could probably dust that off and recirculate that with us and find out what's the nuts and bolts. Are we building it adequately for the size and need of this area? Or is it strictly, are we just trying to make it so that it's just a neighborhood pool? Or are we looking at the whole service assessment study area that we have that's pictured on our screen? I mean, those are good questions. And if we're talking to the residents, they need to understand that, that's for this area, but there's also going to be some effects for the other parts of the city that we're going to have to do some trade-offs with as well, that we're getting a lot of phone calls in a lot of different areas. So that's just something that we really need to think. Councilman Granville.
Yeah, I think as you go back and talk to residents more, it sounds like there's generally consensus to move forward with something in the way of a pool. I think the thing that would be helpful for me is to go back to the city manager's point. I'd want to know what residents meant by a city pool, like a neighborhood pool. Candidly, and I'm not saying I'm right, but I didn't even imagine that it would be able to do laps. I didn't even imagine it being big enough and have lanes. Now, that might be that 4 or 5 people here did imagine that, but when you just say, do you want a pool, there's a whole range of what that means. And so I would say if you could, when you talk to residents, if you could show them 3, 5, 8 photos with lanes, without lanes, with an area for diving that's deep enough, with an area that's maybe, 5-ish feet deep, and there's no place deep. It's just sort of like the way you'd imagine sort of a safety pool at a resort. Because that would give us a better sense of what meets those neighborhood needs that they so clearly are saying they need, they want.
The only thing with that is, it's like, okay, you're going to give someone a choice of a Mercedes or a Chevrolet. Who do you think, what people are going to pick?
Put price tags next to it.
I mean,
Don't put it without dollar amounts.
You got to have some dollar amounts, because you're always going to pick, someone's going to want a grandiose pool with slides and lanes. And I mean, let's be realistic. I mean, we also got to make sure that what's in a budget that we can understand, being fiscally responsible and still accomplish the needs that our residents expect and deserve from us.
Our residents should have these.
And that's the other thing, and I brought this up. I mean, they need to understand, we're all transparent. here's our current CIP, and if some things are moved, this is some of the things that could be off the list. And I think when people are asked that question without all the information, you're almost making a decision based in the vacuum, and it's kind of skewed. But if you understand that, okay, we're looking at a $10 to $15 million expense, something up here that we need to have done in the city, they may not know all the ins and outs of this budget, but that's the reality of what we as a council that we have been elected to do, have to make that decision. So I think it's important, there's a trade-off. Vice Mayor?
One last thing, I just want to reaffirm what Councilmember Granville was saying, in that looking at the potential for bonding for this and/or a potential, quality of life tax if it's included with other aspects of pre-K or whatever we're looking at. I mean, we should talk about creative financing options, naming rights. We should look at ways to design creatively so we don't have to do the demolition, because that is 30%, maybe up to 30% of the cost, it says here. So if we can look at creative solutions, a gerrymandered pool, you can learn to swim in a pool that's, have little breaks like that. But I realize, we do have to have lanes, you have to have areas separate where kids can be and learn to swim, and there's all that need. But I would just urge us to really reach for the stars.
Mr. Mayor, if I can add one more thing?
Yes.
The picture on the slide here to the far right, we didn't really mention, but that is a picture of Escalani's pool, where it does have the lanes in the middle and the zero depth play feature on the side and the slide. So that's kind of our basic neighborhood pool that we were pricing this off of. It is 5-6 feet deep for the lap swim. It's the zero depth in the play feature area with the spray elements as well for that multi-age group. This is kind of where we were coming from. So we could minimize down from this standpoint and try to get some different numbers and kind of go from there if that's a direction that we're given.
Mayor, if I could add to that, I think you guys have made a lot of progress tonight, and I think if we gave staff the direction of figure out what you can build for $10 million that would satisfy the needs of the community, they can come up with several options, go back out to the community and say, would you prefer this or that? And I think we can do that, but we're getting late in the budget process. Not late, but I think tonight we can't still be talking about a $15 million pool, because when you get to the CIP later tonight, $10 million is going to be painful to take out of what's in the green. 15, I would say you will not be able to do. You're going to balk at that. So if we're all okay with that, it's not, and to the city manager's point, I think the prior pool that was there in Clark Park was larger than what they're proposing here. They're already proposing a scaled down model.
Right.
Yeah.
The one that was there before, it actually had a high dive.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So if that's the direction, then when we get to the CIP here in a few minutes, then we'll start talking about how we might be able to squeeze $10 million into the CIP.
I mean, we say that now until we get down to our CIP.
In about 15 minutes.
In about 15 minutes, I think that's to be continued. So I think for now, I think the discussion is there consensus to council to move forward with a smaller down version of about the cap at around 10 million?
And the master plan process for Clark Park.
The master plan process, I think, is going to be crucial, because you also have to make sure we don't have enough parking now. And it's not really a regional park, it's a neighborhood park. That's the other thing we need to keep in mind. How it was designed in the 60s, late 60s and early 70s is way different than how it is today. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To be continued.
Are we moving to the CIP now?
Yeah.
Mayor and Council, Mark Day is joining me. He and his budget staff have worked hard to come up with the, we call it the initial recommended, because our city charter requires that before April 1st, we come to you with a recommended CIP, but we know this is not the city manager's recommended budget. So we're calling this the initial recommendation to satisfy the charter without somehow implying that this is what staff wants. This is our initial scoring. This is the criteria that you have approved, applied to the CIP, and we're going to get through this pretty briefly and then get to the nuts and bolts of it. So I did want to remind you of some things that are in your packet. you have the GO bond prioritization. We always give you the red, yellow, green, which is just GO bond funding. It's not the water fund, it's not the arts fund, it's just GO bond funds. We also gave you the quadrant chart or the bubble chart, and in your packet, it's actually interactive, so you can scroll over, mouse over those things, and they'll tell you exactly what's in each of those bubbles. That was at your request several years ago. We also gave you all the public comments that came from the online forum. We had 250 visitors to that forum. We gave you the document showing you the correlation between the community, the business surveys, and the employee surveys, and how those correlate to the performance measures. You had asked for that at the last meeting because you want to know how this all relates. We reintroduced to you all of the project requests that came from the departments. We gave you asked for what was not funded in past budgets. So we gave you 3 years of capital and 3 years of operating budgets of items that were not funded, that have not been funded. We also gave you all the project descriptions for the transit projects that Councilmember Granville pointed out that we had inadvertently left out of because the department no longer requested that. So those project descriptions are in there for you as well. So what we're seeking from you tonight is relatively simple. You don't have to tell us what goes in the red and the green. What you need to do is exactly what you did for Clark Park. Tell us what's important to you. If there's something in the red that's really important to you, you need to tell us. If there's something in the green that you think is a waste of funds at this point and isn't as important as something in the red, you need to tell us that. We'll come back to you with an updated list trying to move things around based on what you tell us, but we're not trying to balance dollars tonight. We're not doing any math up here tonight. We know that the Clark Park pool now, we're going to have to be talking about some things in the green that aren't that important to you. So we'll have to have that conversation. Do you have notes? Oh, there we go. So this, getting to the public early, we think relates most closely to the strong community connections. That's why our charter requires that we do this early. And Mark will go over some of the timing of the budget development process.
Okay, so we'd like to briefly review the where we are in developing the fiscal year 1920 operating and capital budgets. So as Ken mentioned, today we're just presenting the initial recommended projects for inclusion in the CIP. On April 25th, we'll be back with a budget review session with the city manager's recommended budget. And then on May 22nd, we have tentative adoption, and then June 6th is final adoption of the budgets. And then on June 27th, we have adoption of the property tax levy. So I'd like to briefly review the steps we take in developing the initial recommended 5-year CIP. So first, the departments have adopted comprehensive asset management programs that enable them to project ongoing capital needs. And then departments proposed projects, which were provided in your February 21st packet. At the same time, the budget staff was working on determining funding capacities for both pay-as-you-go or cash funding, as well as bond funding. And then these funding capacities will be discussed in a little bit here in some upcoming slides. And then the City Council approved scoring criteria was applied to the project requests in order to prioritize the GO bond funded projects. And then the budget staff met with each of the departments for feedback on the prioritization as we had to reduce initial requests, as the mayor previously mentioned, by $138 million. And then so tonight we're here to review and receive your input on the initial recommended projects. So as we mentioned, we have a few slides here to talk about funding of the CIP. First is the broad categories. So we have our enterprise programs, water, solid waste, golf, and ambulance. These are those operations that are structured like a business. So the users' fees support cash funding or pay-as-you-go of the project or for debt repayment. And then per council direction, golf projects were prioritized with the other GO bond funded projects for this year's 5-year CIP. We have our special revenue, transit, HERF, and performing arts, where the restricted revenue source either is used for pay-as-you-go or repayment of bonds. And then our general governmental or largest source where we either use cash funding or GO bond funding as authorized by the residents.
So Mark was talking about some of the different funding methodologies there based on the different kind of funds, but let's just spend a minute on this slide to talk about this because we go over this every year and it's still a little confusing. You can spend cash for operating or for capital. We know that. We typically spend cash for capital budgets in the enterprise funds, in the special revenue funds where they have dedicated revenue sources. We use that cash there. The reason we use that cash there is because it makes the most sense and you don't incur interest costs, and it's a good, efficient way to fund things. The reason we use bond funding in some of the general governmental things is because we have a revenue source, which is secondary property tax, that can only be used to repay bonds for capital projects. If you don't issue bonds for capital projects, you can't collect a secondary property tax. We do collect a secondary property tax. That's the only thing it can be used for. So it makes perfect sense, and the legislature eons ago pushed everybody in that direction of saying, please use your credit card for capital projects, because even though you collect a property tax, we aren't going to let you pay cash for that project. You have to repay debt with that project. That's why we do that. So that's, you know, a differentiation. We do use some cash for those same general governmental projects to the extent that we want to take general fund cash and apply it because we have room. We're not starving our operations to do it. We have done that to the tune this year of about the cash funding for GO bond eligible projects. I want to say $3 or $4 million.
Yeah, $3 million.
$3 million of general fund money that we are applying for capital projects. That's the extent that we want to do that. We do not want to drain money out of the general fund to pay one-time funds for capital projects and then end up in a hole if the economy turns down and we have to pay payroll and all of a sudden we've spent money for capital projects. So this is a well thought out, and it's been going on for years, a well thought out financing program that we have. So I just want to touch on that. Any questions on the sources of revenue for the different things? Okay. Mark, you can talk about the different levels.
Okay, so the current adopted 5-year CIP is $649 million approximately. The initial recommended CIP for the 5 years covering fiscal years 1920 through 23-24 is $724 million, about a $75 million increase from the current CIP. But this still is within our statutory debt limits and our ability to repay the debt.
It is.
It is.
Just briefly, the sources of the 5-year sources of funding for the 5-year CIP. Most of it, as you can see, is bond related, either enterprise bonds in the water fund or GO bonds. Then the program, we have investments in parks, as you can see, almost 56 million. Police and fire, 49 million, which includes completion of station number 7. Investment in the regional radio system, as well as 911 radio recording equipment. The enterprise is $332 million, and most of that represents water wastewater projects, including water and sewer line replacements, water treatment plant maintenance and upgrades. Transit projects include investment in maintaining the existing assets, including building bus stops and multi-use paths, as well as the streetcar. And transportation is continued investment in improving the quality of the streets. And then general governmental, those projects are primarily investing in existing buildings and our IT infrastructure.
So Mark talked about the project prioritization, and we've applied the council-approved prioritization to that. So I just want to touch on it a bit. What you see in your red, yellow, green, as the mayor said, we've cut out, what's the total, $138 million. What's left in the green is a little over $46 million less than what the department's requested for those projects. Even the projects that were approved, we had to scale back. It's not all or nothing. It's not a project that's approved or not approved. If you say we need this much for, you know, pick streets or parks or something, we figure out what we think you can actually get done in a year, what we think we can finance, and try to move things around. So just the projects that are in the green got reduced by about $46 million before they were approved. So we applied this criteria. The primary is the same.
Ken, to that point though, the projects that are in green, it's scaled back. I mean, it's not 100% what we thought it was. We wanted it to be.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's projects in the red that were completely cut and the projects in the green that were scaled back to squeeze as much in as we could. So we applied the criteria that you have seen over the years, the primary scoring criteria, public health and safety and asset preservation, and we added to that the council strategic priorities when we introduced the strategic management process. And then you can read for yourself the secondary prioritization. That hasn't changed from last year. So we have applied those. The quadrant chart or the bubble chart shows where we are currently on what we've proposed. And if you, this doesn't have the little windows that tell you what's behind all of those, but you have them on your PDF. You can mouse over those and you can see what's behind each of these. So some of the bubbles represent one project. Some of them represent a number of projects that scored the same when it comes to asset preservation and public health and safety. So I'm just going to stop on this chart for a second and say, we know we're about to look at the green list and say, what in here can be cut in order to squeeze Clark Park Pool in? So what would we look at? If you look at the green bubble in the lower left quadrant, that's one that you would say, the total of that is $6.6 million. You would say that's one that scores relatively low on asset preservation, which means you have some new stuff in there. And it also scores relatively low on health and safety. So let's talk about what's in that green bubble there. So this is how this chart comes in useful. If you said, let's start cutting stuff, rather than go through a list of 100 items, let's look at this chart and say, let's look at that bubble first. So what's in that bubble? These are all relatively new things. They're not asset preservation per se. So what's in that bubble is 1.1 million for solar power partnerships, 3.8 million for a new streetscape project from Farmer to College on 5th Street. Plus that would free up $500,000 in HERF funding, $400,000 in transit funding that's also going to that project. City Hall parking and restrooms. We've heard for years, when the bars close at night, we have no public restrooms out here. $800,000 to put a public restroom in, and while you're at it, you would refurbish the City Hall parking lot next door here. It also includes $900,000 for the Rio Salado master plan. So everything that I just mentioned is not maintaining an existing asset. Those are all new things. Those total $6.6 million of things that we want to add to our asset list, right? I would look there before I would start looking at maintaining the library or maintaining existing facilities. This will be your call. I'm just saying there are some options there. If you look at the green bubble farthest to the left, which is about $1 million, I have bad lighting. 2.4. Oh, there you go. 2.4 million. 2.4 million. That's the upstream infrastructure above the Town Lake Dam. So that everything between the old dam and McClintock is now recognized as part of Town Lake. This project would go in and put recovery wells under that portion of the lake that they were never there before, so that we reduce the loss of water coming from the lake. That's $2.4 million. That's something new. So again, there is room in this CIP to say, let's not do 5th Street landscaping project. Let's not build restrooms, all those new things. So there are some room here. We can come back to this bubble chart later if you want to explore some other things, but I'm throwing some things out there. At the last meeting, we came to you with the START tool, and you pointed out 3 things that you said we would like to get options for how we might accelerate these. 2 of those relate to the operating budget, and we're not going to address those tonight. The one that relates, go ahead.
This actually was my question, just on this particular slide. I don't want to open up a whole list of questions.
This slide here?
Yeah, I have a really clear memory of us discussing the one in yellow. I do not remember us talking about number 1 and number 3. Are those discussions that we had that I maybe don't remember? They certainly weren't at our last meeting.
Yeah, they were.
Okay. Those are ones that we at some point decided, but not the last meeting, just like months ago or something.
No. 1 month ago.
Number 2, the one in yellow, I'm sure we talked about. We talked about the other.
Yeah.
Really? I had to watch the video because I don't remember that conversation at all. I certainly remember the one in the middle.
It was a less in-depth conversation, but consensus was gained.
Might be when I dozed off.
So the one that relates to the CIP is the PQI, Pavement Quality Index. So we're going to touch on that a little bit tonight. We won't be addressing the 2 that relate to operating. So we're going to come back to you, as we said we would, and show you some options for accelerating this. The first chart that you see here shows our current funding model, which is increase, this is in our current CIP, increases throughout the CIP, continuing at 10% increases beyond the 5-year mark, so that we would reach the PQI of 70, our target, in June of 2029. Okay, that's the target date. Now, these are estimates. These are our engineering folks and people in engineering and Isaac Shavira saying this is the best estimate we have. So on our current schedule, we would expect to achieve the PQI of 70 by June of 2029. If we go to the next chart, This is what actually shows up in your red, yellow, green list, because staff had already anticipated that we should probably accelerate this. This is adding $6 million to what's in our current CIP so that we can get there by June of 2027. This is $6 million over 5 years additional. These are not magic numbers. If you said, what would 5 do? We could plug 5 in this model. We didn't bring an interactive model, but 6 is not a magic number, but $6 million more over 5 years gets us there by 2027, so a couple years earlier. And then we said, what would be a more aggressive acceleration? And that would be adding $16 million to the current. So that would get you there theoretically by June of 2024. So this is where we've come back to you and said, again, these are not magic numbers. We don't have to add 6 or 16. We can add anywhere in between there. What's in your current, this is what's important to understand, what's currently in the green and funded is adding $6 million over 5 years to get us there 2 years sooner than we would have with our current funding model, okay? That's really what you need to understand here. And then I guess this week, we're going to get to a question slide here soon saying, what do you want to do? But we could address this now. Is there a preference of council, knowing that you're going to try to find another $10 million to pull out of the green? What do you want to do with PQI at this point?
Councilmember Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I'm certainly against option 2. $16 million additional. We're already kind of struggling with Clark Park and all that. And I was one of the 4 that wanted to accelerate the PQI goal by a number of years, but I think we really need to kind of ask ourselves, we can't have it all. Like, are we going to build a pool in Clark Park? And Mayor, I want to remind you that you also joined that consensus too. Laughing at me over there.
No, I'm laughing because that's what I said earlier in the comment about we're going to have some tough choices to make.
Well,
we can't do it all.
That's the point I'm making, is that, if we're going to do the $6 million and knowing that we're taking $10 million out of what staff is recommending, that's a conversation we can have. But I think certainly $16 million is a bridge too far. And I think we need to seriously consider just sticking with our original PQI timeline. Thank you.
So just for clarification, when you say what's proposed now is option 1. So you're saying stick with what we want now, how we are doing it, because we're accelerating it by 2 years.
So
that's why.
So is this option 1 that I'm looking at right here?
This is the current
Yeah,
funding.
this is the current
This is
funding.
current
I'm
CIP.
saying this.
So option 1 is option 1 to accelerate, and
Correct.
option 2 to accelerate.
Correct.
The first slide is
to
current
make the
funding level.
And I'm not, it's not like something I'm going to fall on my sword over for like option 1, but I'm saying, look, we're making some tough choices here. I think getting 70% PQI, by 2028, I'm all for fixing up the roads, and I know that that's a concern, and we're obviously investing heavily in that every year as we move forward. But, I would hate to see some of these other things that are in green that are important to us being cut for the sake of acceleration. Again, I can live with 6 million, like if that's the consensus, but I'm a hard no on the 16 million.
Councilmember Adams.
Yes, I think option 1 is the best option with the $6 million in funding, so we can improve our streets a little bit faster. And it is the #1 concern of our residents, and I think we really have to pay attention to what the residents are requesting. And I know I've been out there to a lot of different meetings and things, and people continue to bring up that subject about being upset about their roads. So I think if we go with the $6 million, not the 16 million, because we can't afford that, I think that would be a good compromise for us.
Councilman Randall, then Vice Mayor Cubey, then Councilmember Redondo.
Yeah, I'm fine with the option 1 speed up for the $6 million. The question I had about it, though, was why, and I'm sure there's a good reason for it, I just don't know it. Why is it that the budget increases each year? Why not front load some of that spending and improvements? Or level it out, right? Rather than having it start at 5.9 and work to 18.2, why not have it run at, $9 or $10 million every year? Is it a staffing up issue? Because I feel bad, for whoever the 20, 27, 28 people trying to drive around the city. That's going to be a bad year to try and drive around the city.
Councilmember, much of the cost increases has to do with increased in product costs as you go along and increase in staffing costs and things like that. There's only a certain amount you can do in a year. And we're trying to maximize the amount you can do. And we actually asked transportation staff, figure out how soon you can front load it, how much can you do in a year so that we avoid the deterioration so you're not spending more later. This is the model that they've come up with that they said represents an acceleration that they can do.
Okay, so the thing that we were looking at then isn't reflective of the number of streets that are being fixed each year. That is relatively flat. It's reflective of the increased cost of doing roughly the same work each year.
No, it is a ramping up of the number of streets as well, but not all of it. Some of
Okay.
it represents just increased cost.
Then I guess from my standpoint, I would say to the extent that you can balance that 6 million out over the years, rather than having residents have to deal with 2 or 3 years of really bad traffic, as we sort of peak at our construction time, I would support that. If that doesn't happen, it's not the end of the world, but I know we all get emails about construction issues. I can't imagine what more street work looks like as far as trying to get around the city if it all peaks at a time.
Just so I'm clear, if you go back to where we are currently, we are already funding money for our streets. All we're saying is because when we had a meeting, our last meeting, we wanted to improve the PQI index sooner rather than later. So the staff came back with an option of we can get to the quality of PQI to 70 2 years by 2026 versus 2028. So that's the only thing. So right now, if we kept it where we are now, we're still investing money in our streets and the quality of our pavement. It's just going to take longer to get to to our goal, which was to have a 70 QPI, our PQI index. So if I understood Councilman Keating's point, and I agree with it, knowing some of the other stuff that we have going, that we need to make some choices on, even if, instead of option 1 and 2, just maintain the current funding level, and that's what we're doing. We're still investing money in our streets. It's just we're not going to hit the goal of a 70 PQI. We're going to hit it later rather than sooner, and if that's my understanding.
Yes, Mayor, and not only that, but it doesn't have to be 6 million. If you wanted to accelerate it from where it was,
Right.
you can say add 2
That was
million,
just a number
add
for
3 million, add 4 million. We will accelerate it to the extent that funding is available. And staff isn't just depending on the funding. They've also increased efficiencies, and they're trying to mix residential streets with the arterials so that we aren't cutting off traffic every time they do a street. And they're getting really good at it. And they're doing better coordinating with the utilities so that when a street's torn up for a utility, we go and pave that street. So it's all improved. We're spending more money than we ever have on our streets. And you will see a marked difference, whether you accelerate this or not. You will notice in the next several years, the streets are becoming better. If you want to do it faster, we can definitely accelerate it. And I know that residents, to Councilmember Adams' point, residents are concerned because they have seen us postpone these improvements for a long time. We are on a good path now.
Right.
If you want to go faster, we'll go faster, but we're on a pretty good path.
So that's something for us to consider. And if I'm based on the proposed CIP, that includes the $6 million increase.
It includes 6 million.
So, okay, so that's a good starting point for us to know if we're trying to add something.
That's why I
with Clark.
advocated for option 2.
I know, Vice Mayor.
Sorry, I think I was next. So, well, I thoroughly respect Councilmember Adams, where you're coming from and the values that you're bringing to the council, because you've heard from our neighbors and you've seen the community survey. I think you made an excellent point, Mr. Mayor, that we already are on this pathway, and there's been a lag, I think, in public perception, but there's also been, I mean, I've heard from people complaining about the road work being done. You know, people complain that the road work's being done in advance of this goal, as well as complain about not having enough of the pavement quality improvements happening. But I think that, I mean, I'd be willing to go, 6 million is way too much. I'd be willing to compromise and go, a lot lower, like $1 million or 2 million. But I just think when you think about Clark Park, and this has been an issue for a couple of years, where we're looking at where are we going to get the funding for this? Where are we going to get it? If we can get even 6/10 of the way there by using that money and still be moving towards our goal with the pavement quality index, because we're really only getting there 2 years earlier. We're still going to have a constant improvement in our pavement quality, and people are starting to recognize that and see that in their neighborhoods, on their streets. And I just think, considering that this Clark Park albatross is hanging on our neck, that it's one really big chunk where we can help to get toward that goal.
Councilmember Iredano Savage, then Councilmember Navarro.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I guess I got to say a couple things really quick and blunt about this. I think that for us to not recognize that PQI is important to our residents is a mistake. So I 100% support the $6 million. I think we need to do that. Now, this is what I would say. I think Councilmember Granville brought up a good point about a lot of road construction. But I will tell you this about our crews. They know how to get the stuff done. And I know I'm willing to take the heat when the residents are upset for a few days, and then they get to see that finished product, because that's exactly what it is that they want. So, and I understand, I don't want to compare this to Clark Pool. I'm not going to remove this to put in Clark Pool, but there are some other things in the green that I'm willing to have that conversation about. This was the #1 thing on our community survey, and for us to just allocate $1 million and not really be able to make a dent, I think that $6 million is a good compromise. I don't think we're obviously going to make it to the 22, but I think that, 5.9 million is a really good start for us to see, where we can go. So I totally support that, and I'm willing to look at some other things in the green to see if we can make some adjustments, but that's not one of them. But I do have a quick question in regards to something similar about this item, and it's about the parks acceleration. And I'm looking at the reappropriations, and I think it's because somebody brought up the fact that can we spend that much money, right? Do we have the ability to actually spend that much money? And if you look through the greens, there are a lot of items that are reappropriations that have to do with the parks. And I'm just wondering, did we think about the ability to actually be able to do all that work, or is that starting to catch up with us?
Thank you, Councilmember. We actually, in a lot of the parks projects, what was requested was all of that reappropriation, plus a lot more. We've scaled those back, and, we're working with Maryland really closely and getting a commitment that these are now projects that we can get through. So I think in the last few years, we've funded some projects that we weren't able to get through, but engineering staff is committed to these projects, and they're getting closer. And on the streets, we've done really well. I misspoke at the last meeting. I thought we were only getting like half the money. We're getting like 90% of the money that we allocate towards streets done that year. So you're right. They know how to get it done. They have been doing that.
I agree. I just was looking at those reappropriations. There's like 6 items in there that are reappropriated. So I just want to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for something that we're not going to be able to keep up
We
with.
scaled them back quite a bit.
Perfect. That's all I need to know.
Councilmember Navarro, then Councilmember Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think Ali's proposes for the PQI stuff, you made reference to something that caught my curiosity. Could we, as a council, decide incremental that we want to scale up to, let's say, $5 or $6 million every year, starting with this year, just $1 million, $2 million next year, $3 million, $4 million, and then $5 million, or even delay that if we wanted to? I mean, we have flexibility to even do that.
The $6 million is over 5 years.
Is over 5 years. And so if we want just to scale down chunks of it and not get to 6 million, we can get to a threshold of 3 million maybe.
Oh, my God.
We could do that, yeah.
I think if we ask the staff, what they would tell you is the more money you spend early, the more you save later. So you could kind of do a reverse scale. You could say, if you're going to spend $6 million, spend 4 of it in the first year and $500,000 every year after that or something, so that might be what they would, if you wanted to do that.
Gotcha. So they're just saying 6 million, 1 point, whatever, 2 million every year.
The $6 million is over 5 years. Yes. It's an increase to the 5-year CIP.
Okay.
Councilmember Keating, then Councilmember Adams.
Yeah, I just want to make a point just so that, because I was confused and want to just clarify everything here. So looking at this slide, we are prepared to spend 5.9 million this year, 6.8 the following, et cetera, et cetera. We can all read this slope here. So no one's talking about taking away that money. That's money that's set, and that's money we're going to spend to address the pavement quality in the city year over year over year. Now we go to the next slide, please. This is what I'm talking about. So this is an additional $6 million in funding, not to have anything to do with the other funding that we just looked at. And what this does is this gets us to our target goal 2 years earlier. So in my opinion, I don't think that $6 million is worth 2 years sooner, considering we need to build the pool in Clark Park. We have a lot of other things we need to fund. You know, I just don't know if 2 years is going to make or break the conditions of the roads in this city. And I'm happy to entertain, you know, like $1 million or whatever, but I want to know, like, what is that going to get us? Is it an extra, is it a year earlier? Is it 6 months earlier? So again, you know, I just don't think that for as much as we struggle with what to fund and how much to fund, I'm not sure 2 years is worth $6 million. That's it.
Councilmember Adams?
I think the $6 million is worth 2 years earlier pavement management or quality index improving, because our residents have spoken to us a number of times. It's the number one concern that they have, and I think we need to listen to the residents and what they want. Second is, I would like to know from Mr. Jones as to the other CIPs that we do, like engineering does. How much money did we have in rollover last year from those CIPs that weren't completed?
I would have to, I don't have that number at the tip of my finger here, but there were several projects all over that we didn't get funded, and we addressed that this year, and we tried to scale them back as far as we could to try to squeeze as many projects. If you look at the number of projects that were in the red, it's very few, because we scaled a lot. Like I said, just in the GO bond funded, I think it was $47 million that is reduced from what they had requested. So you're right. We have a performance measure that says we would like to get to spend 90% of what is budgeted for GO bond funding. We're not at 90%. Mark has a better number. We're
Around 62.
We're about 62%, which means we're funding projects that aren't getting done, but they're getting much better at it.
So you guys are the math wizards. So if we're at 62%, then how much did we not use then last year? If our goal is 90% and we're at 62, how many millions of dollars is that we did not spend last year? Approximate?
Well,
20 million?
Let me tell you another inefficiency in the process. We budget projects fully, knowing that they might get done with them this year. We're budgeting them for next year because we have to approve the budget before this year ends.
I understand that.
So a lot of the carry forward is we knew it wasn't going to get done. We've got it budgeted in 2 years, knowing that as soon as the fiscal year starts, we know exactly what they got done, and we restrict their spending. So the budget overrepresents what we expect to spend anyway. So I can't give you an exact dollar figure. What I would like to do is go in there and say, what did we expect them to not spend, and then what did they really not spend? The 60%, we would like to get to 90%. The reason that we're not shooting for 100, because we know you can't possibly spend it all, because we've double budgeted some of it, because we aren't quite sure whether you're going to get it done this year, and we have to budget it for next year, otherwise you won't have the authorization to spend. So 90% is our target. We're at 60-some%.
Exactly. My point is we would be able to do the streets and spend the money that we needed to, but in engineering, we are backed up with our CIP spending. And I worked for the city for a long time. I know how that works, and I know that there's a lot of millions of dollars that are left over every year that aren't spent. So I would like us to look at some of that money that's not being spent because we're not able to do it as fast as we'd like, and use that money for either Clark Park or the streets.
Councilmember, it isn't going to work that way. That's why you see the large increase from last year's budget to this year's budget, because we know it's spending authorization. It's not cash. We know how much secondary property tax we're going to get in to pay bonds. What we've said is you can spend more. We're giving you more authorization to spend because we didn't spend enough last year. That's why we have that large increase. We've already applied all that money. The reason all of those projects are in the green is because we have applied all of that authorization. You have a huge capital budget in front of you in the green. The mayor asked, are you sure this isn't going to exceed our levels? It's not, because we didn't spend all the money last year.
Okay.
So we have applied the maximum. There's not unspent cash sitting out there.
Okay.
If you fund the green.
Okay, and I would like us to stay with option one of the $6 million in funding. And how about we do like a $4 million up front, like the first year or so, and get the streets improved quicker, because the materials are going to be cheaper the sooner we buy them and get them done. So what would you think about doing something like that, Ken?
Thank you, Councilmember. I would have to talk to Maryland about their staffing and how quickly they could get that done. A lot of it has to do, I can tell you, Councilmember Granville asked a similar question. A lot of it has to do with timing it appropriately so that we're not tearing up a street and then having a utility come in right behind us and tear it up. So you know, the arterials especially, we have to be cognizant of. We also know that your residents are going to see greater improvement because we're moving from the arterials to the neighborhood streets, which is what they typically complain about. They aren't complaining about, you know, driving on an arterial in South Tempe. If
Yeah, they
live in
are.
they can be complaining, but
They are to me.
they've gotten a lot better. But they will see a marked improvement in the residential streets. So I
think that would be a good option because of the materials are going to continue to
Yes.
go up in price. So
Yes,
why not
to
give
the
more
extent
for
that
our,
we- Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk. To
why not give more money or more for more money
the
for?
extent that we can spend it early without sacrificing by having somebody come right back in and tear it up afterward,
Sure.
we would do that.
Yes, I agree. Thanks, Mr. Jones.
Okay, I think, and listen to the conversation, I mean, we want it all, and we all know that we can't have it all. But the good news is, if you look at what we're currently spending for our PQI, we're investing, you know, money every year, and we're increasing it every year at the current funding levels. Now, the topic we just had before this conversation about another amenity in one of our neighborhoods, Clark Park Pool, we're looking at $10 million. So we need to find $10 million. So if there's a way that, if there's council consensus to either maintain the current levels of funding for our, our pavement quality index, knowing that we're investing that money every year, and if we want to, if there's a way that we, instead of spending the $6 million, we want to propose something less so we can try to find some other projects that I know other council members have mentioned and agreeing that we could reduce. We don't know what those are, but we can ask, Ken Jones and Mark Dick, and we can ask them, where else are there areas for us to cut? But I would tell you, everything that we're doing is in front of us. We're investing in our city. Mr. Jones said it perfectly. We're investing how many more $1 million in the last year?
75 million?
75? It's increased. And keep in mind, even though we're increasing it, we also had to scale back $138 million over the 5 years because of the lack of funds. And I also want to point out, when we did our forecasting, when Ken Jones mentioned to us about we're going to receive less revenues coming in because the economy is slowing down. And we have to also prepare for that as we move forward in the future. So if we want to try to do as much as we can within the budget and the numbers we have, the way the current funding model is a good thing. It's just a council decision whether or not we want to accelerate the PQI. That's a big chunk of money. And we're also looking at adding $10 million. So there's got to be some give and take here. So I would look to my colleagues to see, are you fine with the current levels of the PQI? Even though it's one of the top concerns of our residents, we're still investing in it. But we also have other concerns that we need to address as well. Yes. Yes.
I just want to make a quick clarification because you mentioned that the conditions of the streets and sidewalks were the #1 issue in a community survey. And actually, I mean, it's high up there. Like the mayor said, it's #3, but neighborhoods and police services were at 24% each. And then the condition of city streets, that means that 24% of people said neighborhoods were at the top, 24% said police services, 20% said conditions of city streets and sidewalks. No doubt it's a main priority, but neighborhoods kind of and police services were the top ones, just to clarify.
To summarize where we are, I mean, we're in a good place, and we're very fortunate to have the authority to make the decisions we're making with the resources that we do have, and we should not take that for granted. So with that moving forward, I think it's important in coming upon us that we don't have to take everything out tonight. We could give direction to staff and come back to us with recommendations, what we're talking about regarding the PQI. What are some different scenarios? How we want, to get some funding in there for the Clark Park Pool because we think it's important. And I think we are giving our staff enough direction to come back to us, given what we have. And I think that's a good way to start. Councilman Granville.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate your comments. And it sounds like there's not quite consensus around the $6 million option 1 increase, which is a little bit of a shame because it is one of the top things that we hear all the time. But I also appreciate, Robin's shaking her head, she knows as well as anyone. She probably hears it quite a bit as well. But I understand your point, Mayor, to try and find some middle ground. So I'm going to try and propose that middle ground in the hopes that we can get to a consensus here and still respect what residents are asking for. And so my middle ground would be, instead of that $6 million number, if we could send staff with a $4 million number And I'm going to add one caveat to that, and that is that as part of these streets that are getting redone, the bike lanes also get painted with green paint as they're being redone as part of that $4 million. That ties into, I know, the work that Councilmember Keating's been working diligently on. It ties into our Vision Zero goal, which we just put out a draft of. So my suggestion, if we can get to a consensus, is $4 million with the understanding that the bike lanes get painted green as they go around with that, with future projects. And hopefully we can get to 5 here.
Councilor Navarro.
Thank you, Mayor. If we're torn on this, I could go either way on this thing. If you want to keep the funding as is, as we're trying to do, that's fine. If the council is split on this between the 6 million, I said split it in half, go 3 million on it. I think that, even for me, right-of-ways and streets, that's all important to me. And we'll be talking about wall issues that are coming up down the road that have the relationship to what the quality of our look and feel of our city is. So I'm willing to cut it in the middle or keep the existing funding.
Councilman Arredondo?
Yeah, I mean, I know how to compromise. I can totally appreciate that. But I do think we need to respect what we're hearing within our community. And the community wants different than what we've been doing. And I think in order to do that, we have to allocate, an investment and an infusion of cash. So if it's $3 million, that's great. And I appreciate the fact of the painting of the green and within the bike lanes, but I don't want to tie it to anything. I don't think that's the right process, so I don't agree with that piece of it. I'm hopeful that as we move forward with Vision Zero that's going to be important and included anyway, but I'm just not comfortable adding it right now just because I just don't think that's the way we should do things.
Okay, so is there consensus to invest the PKI with additional 3 years and have staff come back to us and see where we are? I mean, 3 million? I mean, I'm asking for the consensus. If there's that, is there consensus?
The statement I made was for 4 million, though.
I know, but we've had 3 requests for 3 million. So, I mean, we could say 5 million, we could say 6 million. I mean, we got to find some middle ground, knowing that we can't have it all. And I think just to reiterate, we are investing in our city. We've been investing over $70 million more, $75 million more than we did last year in our CIP because we're very fortunate to have the resources. That being said, we have some choices that we need to make. It's not like we're not investing. If we weren't investing, that's one thing, but we are investing, and it's up to this council to decide whether or not we want to invest it in, on this section or this section. So I think where we are, if there's a compromise to invest in what we're hearing from our residents in the pavement quality index, we want, the proposal is 6 million. If we come with 3 million, are we good with that? Or do you want to just keep the current level of fundings? Councilmember Keating.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I just kind of want to make the point that it's kind of being framed as, are we going to invest in our streets or are we not? And to your point, Mayor, we are investing in our streets quite heavily. And not only that, we are going to continue investing in our streets more and more and more each year. My original point was, I don't believe that $6 million is worth getting it done 2 years sooner. At the same time, at the same time, look, I'm not trying to be here all night beating this up either. If my colleagues on the council can live with 3 million, that's something fine. But I'm very worried about what we're going to cut out of this green. I mean, I don't know where that money's going to come from. I'm circling some things over here, but that seem kind of a bit much, but I don't really know. But I just want to quickly address Councilman Granville's bike lane thing. That is something that the Bike Safety Working Group is going to take a look at.
Mr. Mayor.
Vice Mayor Kiwi.
So, I'm willing to see it not necessarily as a decision tonight, but as a placeholder. Let's look at it at 3 and then revise and maybe have to come back to it. But I agree with Councilmember Granville and Councilmember Keating's proposal about the bike lanes, because we know there is a definite safety need associated with it. And the roads are not just for drivers of cars. The roads are for people who bike and people who scooter. And we know this is going to be a main recommendation coming out. So I would support that as well as a placeholder right now. So the green paint when appropriate, when there's a bike lane, and the 3 million as a placeholder right now, but not as a definite decision right now.
Propose a solution. And you're asking for $10 million to come out to fund Clark Park Pool. We're going to get some more feedback on you from some other projects, but we'll come back to you next time with $14 million in cuts. All you need to tell us is, should we include in that something from pavement? And if pavement's included in there, you can decide later, you know, we're going to give you we're going to skim off the top, let's just say 14 million. You pick the 10 million out of there. And if some of it is streets and you decide later we don't want to cut streets, there's something else there that's less important. So we won't come back to you with 10, we'll come back with a little bit more, 14, 15. What is the first 15 we'd cut? And then you can pick from there. That way you don't have to decide tonight, because you really haven't talked about anything other than streets yet.
Yeah.
So that's what's making this hard.
Excuse me, that's a really good point to make, because Joel is, you know, we're talking about also right-of-way and walls, and that's going to be coming up as well, and that's an additional expense, so.
Councilmember Ardano Savage and Councilmember Keating.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we can beat it up. I agree with the vice mayor. Let's just put a placeholder in there. I mean, I think that's a good thing to at least start the discussion. But I know we could talk about this all night long, but I think it would be kind of great for us to just talk about some of the things that are maybe high priorities, in the sense of like what things that I would like to see us focus on and not take out of the green. Because some of them I've gone through and I've read the background material, and I'm not really sure how important it is in regards to our investment in Tempe. But there are some things to me that are really important. And of course, I still have the PQI on there. I think our roads are important. Safety, anything relating to safety, because I know that's another thing that our citizens were very concerned about in neighborhoods. So I put those as my top. Anything that has to do with ADA. And I think we have to start being really, really focused on our facilities. So anything that is an investment in our facilities that has to do with maintenance, design, or future use, I think that has to stay in. We have to do that. I think we have to maintain and keep Diablo. I saw some things in there. I think Diablo Park, we've got to really make sure that we continue to invest in that. And I will continue to advocate for our fire stations, of course, Station 7 being finished, and hopefully, you know, keeping Station number 2 in there. I know that's going to be one of those things that I think I've been batting around for about 5 years, but I think that's one of the things that definitely needs to stay. So, and I was kind of thinking about, I'm going to float this idea out there of just food for thought. And when we talk about facilities and space, I know that is one thing that when we probably get this overall plan that's coming out, I know we're going to be in some serious hurt when it comes to being able to, one, maintain our facilities and where we're at, and knowing the infusion of investment. But I would really consider, and I know it's in the red now, which is Denell Plaza, but really think about what we are going to do with that. Do we really want to spend a lot of money on Denell Plaza, or do maybe we want to think about possibly selling that property and using it for the library complex to create like a human services a building or something to that effect. So I would like us, exactly, I would like us to really just think outside the box a little bit and really see what that best investment is. I know it's in the red, but maybe it could really help elevate some things that I know are going to be coming down the road soon. That's all. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Keating.
I'm all right.
Does that sound like a good direction? Ken? Mark?
So Mayor, let's move on and talk about some other things. We have a slide here. I just want to talk about some things we made notes of here that we thought we should mention to you. There are a couple things in the yellow we already talked about. McClintock Pool. So what that means is, to Councilmember Ardano Savage's point, that we will still have $600,000 that we intend to spend on McClintock Pool for a total renovation of that facility. We're not taking all of the money out and moving it somewhere else. What we're saying is, let's take the $3 million community center and turn it into a $600,000 complete renovation of that facility as it exists. So that's what that means. You guys have already given consensus on that. That's what that meant. The Tempe Center for the Arts Phase 2 is in the yellow because we know that, you know, we have a development going on out there, and we have negotiations going on, and whether TCA Phase 2 should be funded, and whether the city should come up with CIP money for tenant improvements and a possible TCA Phase 2 and things like that. Well, what I'm telling you is we have that in the yellow because we know that's hanging out there. We don't have an exact dollar amount. So that's sitting there in the yellow just to remind you there's nothing in the CIP to fund anything there currently. Okay. So just wanted to remind you of that, which doesn't mean you can't get TCA Phase 2 built. It just means that this pot of money has not been dedicated to that at this point. So if it worked out to some kind of private financing for those improvements and we repaid it over time from revenue from that development, that would be fine. It's just not coming out of our bond authorization. And then I wanted to talk about the Broadway corridor, the Smith Hub, and the Rio Salado master plan. I'm going to propose something here. We got projects proposed coming out of working groups, council working groups, like let's do this intersection and that intersection on Broadway and maybe do some ADA improvements, and over in Smith Hub, let's put some streetlights in. What I would recommend is, why don't we do a master plan for Broadway corridor and Smith Hub like we did for Rio Salado, and that competes well in the CIP. I can tell you, when you say let's go fix this intersection on that street, how does that compete with all the other pavement projects? Not well. It just doesn't. It would be like cherry picking one thing and saying, can we do that? But if you have consensus that the Broadway corridor is important, that Rio Salado master plan is important, and that Smith Hub is important, we'll get staff to do master plans to identify all of the elements that might be included in there, just like we did for Rio Salado. We've identified several elements in the Rio Salado master plan. We could do the same thing for Smith. Is there traffic calming? Is there street widening? Are there street or light improvements? Are there tree plantings? All of those elements, so that as we fund it each year, we get it back to the working group and say, based on the funding, what would you suggest we do? Knowing when it's going to be paved next, knowing when the streetlights are already scheduled for improvement. So what I'm suggesting is, let's do a master plan. What's in the green right now is $641,000 in years 4 and 5 for Broadway corridor, $300,000 in years 3, 4, and 5 for the Smith Hub, and then $900,000 in the Rio Salado master plan. And what we're saying is, take that funding, let the working group come back to the council and gain consensus on what that money should be spent on. That makes a lot more sense to us, but it's up to you.
Councilman Navarro.
Mayor, just for clarity, you're talking about grouping all that money together and just, or?
All three separate.
All three separate, that's, okay, I'm good with that.
Master plan for each of them. We don't
Yeah, I'm good
currently
with
have a
that.
master plan for Smith Hub or Broadway, but staff could do that.
Good with that.
Identify all
Yep.
those
Good
elements.
idea, good idea. Yeah.
Agree. That goes against some of the stuff, that recommendations that came out.
Not only that,
Yeah, that's what he's saying, because we're going to do is we're going to have, I know, but that's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, think about what we're saying. If I understand it, Ken, right, and I agree to it, but somewhat, but I just wanted to be clear. Right now, we have certain projects that he's mentioned in Broadway corridor, Smith Hub, and obviously, and he gave the numbers that are currently funded right now in the green. He's saying that we should be looking at a master plan for those, so we have a more concise way of doing this. Is that my understanding?
that's
Okay.
what we would propose.
For those corridors.
For those corridors. Councilmember Keating.
Thank you. So with regards to Broadway, as you know, the working group is doing a couple different things on that road, and one of them is the CIP addition that we've asked for. I am fine with master planning that, as long as it does not delay any of the other plans that we want to do on Broadway. So if that's, I mean, as long as we're not kicking the can down the road, as long as we're not delaying, as long as we're not relitigating previous, I'll say, discussions, I'm fine with that.
But, go ahead,
So
Ken.
how staff sees this as one-off projects coming to us, trying to compete with the other projects in the CIP, and they're new when we're not maintaining the facilities we have. They don't do well. They are going to score low, and we're not going to recommend they get funded. But if you tell us that it's a priority of council to start working on the Broadway corridor, to start working on the Smith Hub, to start implementing some of the needs in the Rio Salado master plan, then what we're saying is, let's identify what those needs are so staff can see what the total plan is, and then we can fund it in increments. Right now, it's just a one-off project. I don't see it as any part of any plan. It's an intersection on Broadway.
Thank you. To that point, though, Broadway corridor is already in green. So what do I get by agreeing to?
Well, we put it in the green, assuming that you would agree to a master plan. If you don't agree to a master plan and we look at what was proposed, we would say, how does that
that rank?
intersection compare to all of the street work that has to get done in the city? Is it the highest need? Is it the worst intersection? No, the answer is no. So, but what we're saying is, if it's part of a master plan and you identify all of the elements that you're trying to accomplish, it starts to make sense to us that we would contribute funding. And to be honest, if you know what the funding stream is, you might go back in your working group and say, they're already going to do pavement there in 3 years. Let's just wait for that. And when they do it, they'll just stamp the pavement on that intersection and get it done. Let's not take it as a one-off. Let's try to incorporate it into our current CIP.
You're calling it a master plan, the money's going to be utilized for whatever specific needs in that master
All
plan.
right, yeah, okay.
It's just a suggestion.
All right.
I'm not trying to bully anybody. I'm just saying.
Seems like you are, Ken.
I am just a little bit.
Good job. Done, touche.
I got my eye on that one over there.
So, so let me go on with what we have here. And then, of course, we gave you the transit fund. You haven't had a discussion about this. Councilmember Granville brought it up that the transit staff looked at what had been proposed in the CIP last year and figured out that we bit off a little more than we can chew. They took out 3 projects. Those are the baseline bike ped underpass at Western Canal, the bike share expansion, and the north-south rail spur multi-use path from baseline to our Chandler border. Those were in the CIP last year. They inadvertently got left out. What we should have done is come to you and said, we recommend these for not funding. We don't have enough transit funding to do all of that. We can put those back in, but we're going to have to take out a recommended transit project. So we just haven't had that discussion.
Councilman Granville?
So I think once staff took it out, I think the fight was over. I think I'm just sort of talking to the wind now. Actually, kind of looks like I am too. But I would say it was very frustrating to me that this phase 2 north-south rail spur was taken out, particularly given that it's $800,000 of city money and it's $2.8 million in grant money. It's more than a 3-to-1 payback on our money. It's really hard for me to understand how something with a 3-to-1 dollar match doesn't make the list. And not to beat an old horse, but a year or two ago, we talked about the expansion of the Saturn route, and the thing that I said in that meeting was, I think the expansion of the Saturn route is a great idea, but I don't think it's where I'd spend my next dollar. And that discussion went with us doing a Saturn route, and I respect that, and it's going to be a great, wonderful project. And at the time that we had that discussion, it was made clear to us that that wasn't in lieu of doing something else, that we were sort of flush with money. But the Saturn route, the operating costs of it is $2.2 million a year. That's just money we give, $2.2 million a year, $15 a rider. We could put them in an Uber for that price. That's forgetting buying the things. It's a little bit like a person who's got money who decides to buy a car instead of a house, right? A house is a one-time purchase that you get to have. And a car is just money you just keep throwing money into forever. And it's a little frustrating to me that we had $2.2 million every single year forever for the Saturn route, but we couldn't come up with $800,000 to get a $2.8 million match for a fixed thing that has very little future operating costs. To me, that was, I don't know if we'd have made that same Saturn decision if we'd have known we were later cutting a 3-to-1 match. And of course, I'm not proposing we take away the Saturn route now. It's a great route. It'll be successful, I'm sure. But I do think it's fair to say that we were given not great information that led us to a not great conclusion, and that if we have the ability to rectify that 3-to-1 match today, I think we should seriously consider that.
So, Mayor, so that I don't put transit staff on the spot, because I didn't warn them that this might be coming, I will say that why don't we come back to the next meeting and ask them if we wanted to put that $800,000 back in there to leverage all of the federal money, what would we cut instead of that? What would be the next thing we would cut? And obviously, it's not going to be an orbit route at this
I
point.
also thought we did have the numbers when that presentation happened.
What's that?
I thought we did have the numbers.
Yeah, the numbers at the time were that we'd have plenty of money to do the Saturn route and do the other things that were in the CIP.
If you're interested in seeing that, we will have the transit staff come at the next one, explain the rationale, because this isn't the last bite you have at this apple, and just give you a little more information on what they were thinking when they took that out.
I appreciate that. Just because, I mean, we had a really good discussion about $3 million, where it's just $3 million out the door that's going to immediately start to deteriorate the day after we build it. Not to say we shouldn't do it, but this is literally a 3-to-1 match for something that has almost no maintenance costs.
We will definitely come with more information.
Vice Mayor?
Councilmember Granville, you make an excellent point, and it raises also a larger question. Is that cash back, that cost share computed into these projects? Because knowing that something has a payoff, and if it's LED lights, we know there's a problem with that, but if it's projects that actually will save us money, is that somehow computed into the ranking?
In the ranking for the GO bond fund, it absolutely is. When we get to these special revenue funds like the transit fund, we depend on the expertise of the transit staff to say what is our next best dollar spent. So I don't know what the rationale is, but I'm going to have them come and explain it to all of us.
Councilmember Adams?
Yes, I was wondering about the Indian Bend Wash. Will this project eliminate the flooding that is happening in our North Tempe neighborhoods, or any other project that's slated for the CIPs this year, Ken?
We have actually gotten a lot of information about our storm drain projects as late as today. So here's what I know about the storm drain projects. We currently have 3 projects in there. They total 5.7 million city money, $2.9 million flood control money. So $8.6 million we have in the CIP for flood control projects. We know that North Tempe residents have complained about a flooding situation up there. We also have some in central Tempe where we have some flooding situations. Our staff hasn't had a good tool to compare them and rank them and prioritize them until March 15th. On March 15th, our contractor came back with a prioritization report that places all of those projects in order of what should be done first. Out of the top 3, 2 of them are North Tempe, are in the North Tempe area and those flooding areas. The problem with that is one of them is a $7 million project and one of them is a $1 million project. So the worst flooding situation we have up there that involves about a dozen homes that get flooded pretty regularly, there's a $7 million project that the flood control district has given us now a plan for how to resolve it. We could have put curbs in and protected those homes and it would have flooded the next house. So what they're proposing is a new storm drain that goes east, then it goes south, and then it goes east some more, and it takes it all the way to the, the Indian Bend Wash. It takes it over to Indian Bend Wash, and it completely alleviates that problem. It's a $7 million project. The other project is $1 million, and it's relatively much more simple. The $7 million project, there's a similar project just north of our border in Scottsdale that they're also recommending that's an $8 million project. Scottsdale doesn't currently have that planned either, but this report is relatively new. So what I'm telling you is, knowing that staff has $8.6 million in storm drains now, some of those repairs down here ranked much lower than the need up in North Tempe. So I talked to Maryland today. With the report that they got on March 15th, they're going to go and reprioritize those and more than likely address some of those North Tempe issues sooner without adding any money to the CIP, just reprioritizing the money.
Could you come back?
That's kind of a long story, but it's a lot of information.
No, it's important information. So could you come back, Ken, and talk to us about that after they reprioritize?
I think we'll probably have Maryland do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. Thank you.
I just want to, first, I really want to, I mean, there's a lot of discussion here, and there's a lot of tough decisions that we have to make, and I want to thank Ken, you and your staff for what you've come up with, because I do know that what you have recommended for us in our budget, our CIP, is really reflective of some of the main standards that you mentioned earlier about, you know, how we're handling the deferred maintenance that we have, but also asset preservation and management. I think that's something that we've always talked about as a council as we looked at our CIP. And you also mentioned, and I mentioned it earlier tonight, about the long-range forecast. The economy's starting to slow down. We also need to be respectful of that. And with the growth in population and our residents and businesses that we have, there's a lot of stress on our infrastructure, and I think we all see that and appreciate that, knowing where we are. But one thing, when you come back to us, I know, and just looking at this, about half of our CIP has to do with our water and wastewater. That's stuff that we cannot defer that any longer because of the age and the infrastructure of it. So, and I know that we have some tough choices to make, but just keep in mind, for the council perspective, when we look at this list that is provided to us, staff has done a great job based on the direction we have given in the past. And we're asking them to come back and make some different assumptions and assessments, and we know you're going to help us with that. But just so we are under the understanding that half of the CIP really has to do with water and wastewater, any deference of those is going to have huge impacts on us and our system. And I just want to throw that out there before we move forward. And I do want to thank Ken and Mark Day and the rest of your team for everything you guys have done, because we're lucky that we have the resources that we have to do what we have, even increasing last year's CIP budget to this year's CIP budget by $75 million. And knowing that we still had to cut $138 million out. And also knowing that we have a $27 million in deferred maintenance in our assets. So I just want to throw that out there before anyone else has anything else to say. I mean, I think you have enough direction.
Unless you want to throw out specific projects that are in the green that you don't favor and specific projects in the red that you absolutely want us, then we'll come back. You know, I'm not going to try to balance the budget here tonight, but we will come back. But any other recommendations you have, we're all ears.
So without sparking a dumpster fire, I do want to talk about golf course asset management, and there are items 110 and 111. And for me, it'd be really valuable to see that divided into the Ken McDonald versus Rolling Hills. Golf is an enterprise fund, and we made a decision a couple of years ago to any renovations or any additional costs would be paid for from either bonds or general fund. And I kind of have an issue with that because we see the declining population of people that golf, and we have the Ken McDonald course, which we're going to invest in with that facility. I understand that, but ASU's closed its golf course, and there is 2.5 miles away from Papago. There is the Papago golf course. I think that's the name of it, and it's Phoenix run, and they are giving discounted prices to ASU people, and we could try and investigate, work out an agreement with the Phoenix course 2.5 miles away to have a good deal for our citizens that use it. There's not a lot of people that use it, and I know I'm sparking the dumpster fire with you guys, but we have to think about larger needs in the city, and when we think about the percentage of people that actually use that course and how much money that goes into it, and it's meant to be an enterprise fund, it's meant to pay for itself, it doesn't. That golf course does not pay for itself. And I think that's a problem that we need to confront at some point, and maybe not this year, but we need to be thinking in the future about the future of golf courses, and that space is valuable in alleviating the urban heat island, but there could be ways it could alleviate the urban heat island and be a part of the Papago Park master plan. There could be an environmental center there. There could be a public use that would be amenable to, I think, to the neighborhoods that would also provide some of those ecosystem services, but be a more equitable project. And so what I guess I'm asking for tonight is, can we look and see the golf course asset management, facilities management, what percentage of that is Ken McDonald? Because I recognize that we need to keep that facility, which is in much better shape. But I'd like to see what part of that is Papago.
That's it. Councilmember Graham, then Councilmember Ardano Savage.
I have not a dumpster fire. I would maybe just a small, like a s'mores, like a recycling bin fire. And just that, and I realize this is not going to get traction. I'm really underselling it. But I have to say it just from a moral point. Our number 2 thing on our list when we all went around and scored things was our tree canopy goal. It scored second highest. The only thing that scored higher was affordable housing. And we haven't had any discussion really at all about accelerating that. Unlike 3 million or 6 million or whatever millions of dollars, that right now is getting funded at about $100,000 a year. We're not talking about huge numbers. And unlike absolutely everything else on the CIP that starts deteriorating the day after we build it, the trees do just the opposite, right? The sooner we build it, the better the canopy later, as opposed to a ramada, as opposed to a pool, as opposed to a road, which starts deteriorating the day we're finished. And so I would at least like us to get some discussion about what a slight acceleration of that would be, even if that's just like $50,000 more a year, because I think that's money well spent, and apparently it was one of our goals that we passed, and it was number 2 on our list.
Councilmember Ardano Savage.
Really quick, I guess I will say I will not take on the dumpster fire. I 100% support the 2 golf courses that we have, and I just want to make a comment because for those of you that haven't been out on the golf courses, they are amazing. They are in the best shape, and everybody that uses them are so proud of that amenity. So, I mean, I think as a council, it comes to more of a policy for us is, I think when you have an amenity that the community can use, is it one that you want to subsidize or not? And I think that's kind of more of the discussion, right? So I do not want to take on that battle. I'm going to get Scoot talking. So I'm just saying, like, I think that, you know, before we think about it, we need to know how they're utilized and the people that are out there using them, because they are completely 2 different courses. They're not at all the same, and you'll get 2 different people that will use each one. So I think if anybody that's a golfer completely understands that, you know, the Ken McDonald's is a lot longer, bigger course, and then of course you have Rolling Hills, which is a lot of, I think a lot of our seniors go there and play, and that's kind of like their home course. So,
but what's a lot mean? I mean, I want to see those numbers and data.
We can definitely have that discussion, but to me, the dollar amount, if you look at that's not something I'm willing to touch.
It's $1.4 million over 5 years. I'm just saying it's not a sacred cow. We need to be able to think critically. We could discard my idea, but I think we should at least approach it and look at data. I know you always like to look
I
at
didn't
data,
say not to do it, Lauren. All I said is I don't agree with it.
I understand, but I would say we need to look at everything.
We are, and that's what staff is doing. Ken?
Anything else? So you're kind of giving us a free hand here. We're gonna go back as a team, and we're gonna say, if we have to cut $10 million, let's add another 4. If we're gonna cut $14 million, what should we cut out of this? So we're not gonna make that decision on our own. We're gonna involve all the departments, and we're gonna come back to you. I'm telling you now, though, those things that are new are going to be the first things we go after.
Right.
We cannot stop maintaining our facilities. We're in the condition we're in because we
Because
did
we haven't
things in the
maintained them.
past where we built things that are new without taking care of what's existing. We have to take care of the existing. So think about, I mean, I don't know how you guys think about the Fifth, and this is just an example, the Fifth Street landscaping project. Everybody loves that project, right? It's a brand new amenity that's expensive.
It is, and that's to my point earlier, where I said half of our CIP budget is a water, wastewater, and then we also have a lot of deferred maintenance that we need to tackle, and it's going to continue. It's not going to get better if we don't continue to invest in it. So that's something that, and I've said that multiple times tonight, so that's something that I think the council understands, and you understand. So when you come back with your recommendations, it's going to be a shocker for us. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a shocker on some of the things that we're trying to do, but this is the direction we're giving you at this point.
Absolutely.
Councilman Navarro.
And just real quick, so just for clarity, when you come back, you're going to show us where we cut it from.
We're going to give you proposals that show you exactly what we're proposing to cut.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right.
Wait, one more.
Yes, Vice Mayor.
So, and I can't seem to find it. The font is so small. The roundabout at Ash and Rio Salado, where is that? What number is that?
I have those, I have a note on those. Those are one of the things that we'll be looking at. Wait a minute. There are 2 of them, and they're together. There's one at I'm sorry. Ash and Rio Salado is not on here. That's transit funded. There are 2 roundabouts on here. One's at College and McKellips.
Right.
One is at Grove Parkway and Priest. Those are both on here. Those are both new. We'll be looking at removing those and see if there's a less expensive alternative. That will be on the list of something new.
I get it. Okay, this is my point, though. It is transit funding, but there are a number of transit projects that are also on this list. They're using general obligation bonding funding. So that means that transit funding, the Ash and Rio Salado roundabout is taking away.
Absolutely. I went and reviewed that today, and the council was presented with 3 or 4 options. One was do nothing, put the streetcar through without doing anything. One was a realignment. One was a straight through. I think there were 4 options, and one was a roundabout, and the council chose the roundabout. If you want to change that direction, you're absolutely right. That frees up some transit funding that we could possibly use for something else. Right. It's not on the red, yellow, green list because it's not GO bond funded. It's going to be cash funded with transit funds. But if there are other transit needs, like the one you pointed out earlier,
I would like to look at that, at least examine that, because I remember staff presenting that there really was sort of a status quo situation. It didn't really increase public safety for pedestrians, bikers, or drivers. It was kind of like, it was sort of a status quo and seemed to be an improvement, but not really a large amount gain for 3.5 million, which is really taking away from other transit projects, which are actually in here taking away from general obligation funds. So, there's a pathway there, and I know we made the decision. I wasn't supporting that decision back then, but I think considering that we need to look thoroughly and be really robust in our discussion, it is something worth considering. And I know it benefits one business a lot, and that's really why we looked at that.
So Mayor, I will talk to Shelley and see how far along we are in the planning process, because this is a Valley Metro project now. And we have delivered to them what we're going to do with that intersection. Let me just check with Shelley. I just want to make sure there's a consensus, because a council member has said, I don't like the roundabout there anymore, and I just need to know, is there consensus that you want us to go and re-examine that?
Councilman Navarro, then Councilmember.
Mayor, what we had proposed, and I know we can go all night with this thing, but I think when staff comes back and they have a list of what they think that can be cut out, that's when we can have that discussion on, totally agree or not agree or debate it and kind of figure it out, because we're going to continue on. I feel like when we start reading down the list, let them come back with what they're proposing. And then if there's something else on the list that you're like, I just don't like this one, it's on the proposal, I think that's probably the appropriate time for that
This
discussion.
is a little different because now we're not talking about the red, yellow, green list GO bond funding. We're talking about the transit fund. You're bringing up an issue elsewhere in the CIP,
connects.
which is transit fund, which is the roundabout at Ash First and Rio Salado, that intersection there, right?
But it's interconnected. You see it has impacts on.
Right, but I'm saying cutting that project won't provide anything more in the red, yellow, green. It's cash transit funded. Do you want us to bring back more information on that?
Well, I think it depends if it's how far down the road you hear from Shelley. Because if it's,
If that's what you want, we'll have Shelley come and, again, I don't want to catch her off
Wait,
guard. She
Councilman
can come
Keating?
back next meeting and tell you what that might mean.
If I'm understanding correctly, cutting the roundabout doesn't change this whole
Right.
matrix whatsoever. So why relitigate it? It's settled, it's being done.
Right.
It doesn't affect this at all. So, I mean, why not talk about McClintock bike lanes? I mean, that's a settled issue. Let's move on. We don't want to be here all night.
Councilman Adams?
Yes, I think we do need to look at removing this roundabout from this section. The feedback I've gotten from engineering experts is that it's not a very good idea to do a roundabout at this intersection. It's actually an engineer's nightmare. And I think it would free up money from another area for transit funding and perhaps more bike lanes or wherever the residents want the bike lanes before we install them. But anyway, I think we need to look at other
So
Other
let's
funding,
get a,
so
let's get a quick
I
response from
could- I-
Shelley. You know, you see all the rail laying along this road out here. They have built the rail. So if we tell them to realign that intersection, we just need to hear is this possible at this point?
It is possible. We're 100% designed. The estimate or the project cost was based on including the roundabout as a SIMPA. We would have to instruct Valley Metro and pay them to go back and redesign it without the roundabout. So that would be an increased cost. I don't have the number in terms of what we've given them so far for the construction. Originally, we had planned to try and do it this summer. It has been delayed, so that does give us a little bit more time, but everyone needs to recognize we've paid Valley Metro and their engineers, and they are at 100% design.
So any change right now would cost us money.
Correct.
How much though?
Councilman Granville?
Yeah, I mean, so to go first to Councilmember Keating's point of what we, the 2.2 million doesn't affect our list, because it's 3.5 million. That's not exactly true because it's transit money. I mean, that is exactly the money I was just arguing about phase 2 of the north-south rail spur that we don't have that's got a 3-to-1 payback. But, and I'm going to go where you don't think I was going to go. At this point, I feel like, look, I argued against that roundabout. Lauren did. We lost that argument. We're now in the design phase. I'm happy to respect having lost that argument now that we're in the design phase. So as much as I would love that money for the thing that I care about, I tend to agree with you that at this point, we're just too far down this road. I wish we weren't. But I mean, unless the number is, less than $50,000 or $100,000, maybe I'd consider it, but my guess is the smile tells me it's not $50,000 or $100,000. Yeah, that 3 point something is going to get cut to not much after.
Well, it's not going to cost $3.5 million to redesign it, but I would guess upwards of a couple $100,000. And then if there's any items that change the design, so we've ordered the rail, that curve takes special rail, so that's been ordered as well.
Yeah, I don't want to mess with that at this point, as much as I wish I had won that argument a year ago.
Mr.
I
Mayor?
believe we have consensus.
Shelley, you're an expert in these things. What do you think about having a roundabout there?
Well,
She's the engineering expert.
I'm just reminding you that the council she brought 4 options to you and the council, so I'm just reluctant. You asked her opinion at the time, staff's opinion at that time.
Yeah, we can't revisit it.
We did not recommend the roundabout.
I'll agree with you.
You did not recommend the
The
roundabout.
staff recommendation was not the roundabout, but the council had reasons to go with the roundabout. There was not a staff recommendation.
There wasn't a staff recommendation.
No, the staff,
I'm just asking, can Shelley give, she's an expert in the
Lauren?
room on these things, and I'm just wondering if she can give an opinion about the roundabout.
Excuse me, Mayor?
Yes.
There may be some value in putting this on an agenda at a future meeting so we can have a more robust discussion specific to the roundabout, since that was previously agendized in a separate meeting.
Yes, but I think we're already down that road. You know it's going to cost more to
It's also
change
not
it.
well
So I
engineered.
think we're going to move forward. I think there's consensus move forward. Vice Mayor Kuby?
Yeah, and, I withdraw my request knowing the cost of it and, and how far along it has been, but it just, and you weren't there on the council when we made the decision, but it just goes to the point of, should the council be making engineering decisions, right?
Exactly.
So
They
we'll
shouldn't
just
be.
take that as a lesson learned, and I'll withdraw my request.
Okay.
So you don't need Shelley to
No.
bring me more information? Okay,
We like you, but thank you.
thank you. Okay.
See how it goes when you try to drive on it.
I think we have enough insight. Thank you, Ken. We're going to take a 5-minute break. Go to the restroom, and we'll be back. and reconvene our work study session, or issue review session. Next item is our CDBG grants. I think I see Levon and Naomi, or just Levon, or Paul. Okay. You going in alone. All right. Make sure the box is on.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Levon Laney, the Manager for Housing and CDBG in the City of Tempe. The purpose for tonight's work study session is to review and provide recommendations for the proposed activities to be funded using the Community Development Block Grant, Home, and Program Income for fiscal year 1920. The Community Development Block Grant and Home Funds operate off of a 5-year consolidated plan. We are entering the 5th year of our 5-year consolidated plan. This was originally approved in fiscal years 14 and 15. It will be a year-long planning process with community needs assessments that have already started. Each year we provide an annual action plan which provides progress updates from the prior year and establishes the upcoming year's planned activities. From the identified priority needs from the 2014-15 analysis, these are the priority needs that were identified at that time. They're in no particular order, so we are still operating off of this list. We are looking to fund through Community Development Block Grant for fiscal year 1920. We are expecting to receive $1.6 million as the allocation, which is based on last year's numbers. If the 1.6 goes up or down, all of this will be adjusted accordingly. We are looking to use the 20% maximum of $320,000 for program administration, which covers staff salaries, papers, pencils, and just the basic administration of the program. We also pay for the housing navigator out of this funding pot. She's been on staff a little less than a year, has worked with 91 families, and has successfully housed 46 at this point. So we're having a pretty good success with that. Public service activities, we are looking at putting $193,000 into the public service funds. Part of that is used to fund homeless activities. Part of that funding goes in through TCC's agency review process, and they make the funding recommendations. The emergency repair program, we're looking to fund at $320,636 this year. So far this year, we have 22 units that we've completed. The primary repairs have been HVAC, water, and roof repairs. We do still have $151,000 of current year funding that will roll into next year. We did intentionally slow the program down a little bit due to some of the federal funding uncertainty we had for a little while, just to make sure we didn't run out of money, but that will roll forward. There is a workforce development position of $50,000 that we are looking at exploring. That would be a joint position with Maricopa County. If this is approved, we would continue to work out the details. The specifics of that would be for workforce development and training services, helping folks to obtain and retain employment, job skills training, GEDs, that type of work. We are looking to put another $716,000 into acquisitions of units for permanently affordable rental housing. At this point, we have purchased 20 units. All 20 are completely leased, and we will be starting a waiting list on those units. So as soon as we buy them there, we're getting them rented out. Moving into the home program activities, we would like to use $29,000 of that for the administrative funding, staff salaries, papers, pencils, just the administration of the program. We do split the funding between the Camp Down Payment Assistance Program and the Home TBRA Program. Camp Down Payment Assistance, we have successfully helped three families purchase a home this year. We have a fourth that is still out looking to find a unit. For the tenant-based rental assistance, that is currently at capacity with 43 households. We have 20 of those households who within the next 3 months will be transitioning out of the TBRA is a 2-year only program, so we will have 20 of those households transitioning into either self-sufficiency or more permanent housing options within the next 3 months, depending on their level of need. We are expecting to have $227,000 of program income come in this year from prior down payment assistance and just home activities. We also are looking to use that fund to help maintain the funding base for the tenant-based rental assistance program so we can maintain the 43 households as we experience turnover in that program. And those were the recommendations.
Well, thank you, Lamont, and thank you. I'm really happy to see that of the community development block grants, a large portion that was going to the acquisition, which I think you said was 20 units.
20 units so far.
That's great. I mean, to see that the bulk of that money go towards acquisition for units for affordable housing, I think is fantastic. And I think the partnership with the county is really great too. So I think for the workforce development position, that's awesome. Thank you. Councilman Navarro?
Yeah, thank you, Lamont. Yeah, this is great information, and just like the mayor said, I mean, personally being in the fire department and seeing the families that are really in need, having that struggle, you get very intimate with what's going on in their emergency, and just to have a resource like we do for the city of Tempe to get these families back on a better track is tremendous, and it's hard to explain. It's hard to be part of unless you're part of it, so to speak. But the other thing is, I think this council has done a great job, even with NLC, going back to DC, lobbying for CDBG money, absolutely educating our president, educating our senators and our congressmen about how important this money is. In fact, it goes in the game plan of what the administration is trying to achieve, not knowing that they were cutting the money that actually with the programs that they're trying to achieve. So our ability to go and lobby to this point has always is going to show a benefit. It's always going to keep this program alive, and the more we do it, and what's impressive is it's not just our cities, but we're getting cities across the country that absolutely have to have this.
Councilman Arredondo?
And I'm just going to ditto what these guys said, but I do want to just take a quick second. And Naomi, thank you and your staff and Levon, because we have come so far. And I mean, I couldn't be prouder of the work that we do and the people that we're able to help. I mean, you're really changing lives every single day. So I just want to say thank you to everybody in the home team and in human services in general, because I know we work really, really hard to do that. And I love the idea of being flexible and creative, and you're always willing, whenever there's an idea floating around, willing to take a look at it. And to me, that speaks volumes. So thank you guys so very much.
Thank you. All right, next item, Tempe Beach Park Wireless. Mark, come on down. Microphone.
There we go, third time. Hello, Mayor, members of the council. I'm Mark Wittenberg, Deputy Director of Internal Services for Information Technology. I'm here tonight to talk to you about wireless in public spaces. So the purpose is to provide the City Council information on the progress of a pilot Wi-Fi program in Tempe Beach Park, and to provide information on a development of a wireless management plan for public spaces. I'd also like to do a little bit of a wireless refresher on the difference between wireless, cellular, talk about the Wi-Fi status in Tempe Beach Park. I'd also like to talk about infrastructure investments in conduit and fiber that we've been putting in and how that can fit into a wireless master plan. So first of all, what council priority and measures? So 3.19, value of special events. By providing enhanced wireless coverage, we can actually provide social media opportunities such as live streaming and posting those beautiful selfies of yourself in Tempe Beach Park. It also provides vendor access for point of sale system and also real-time event information such as providing race results during events such as triathlons or data gathering opportunities. The other strategic we want to make sure that we have full coverage in Tempe Beach Park, so if you do need to reach out for help, that you can do so with your phone, even in large events. We want to make sure that we have reliable first responder communication using either Wi-Fi or cellular and prioritize that service.
We also want to look for technology opportunities such as smart sensors and smart lighting, emergency phones to advance these measures. The wireless refresher, if you recall, so Wi-Fi is a public open standard, and it leverages the same infrastructure as the library system and actually the system that's in the council chambers. It's free to the citizens, and it's maintained by city staff. Then you have the cellular systems, which are more proprietary, and there's 4 main carriers in the United States that provides the bulk of coverage here. As you might know or might have heard, that the carriers are starting to roll out 4G LTE and 5G now, which really means to be able to do this coverage. The fee that they charge is really based on how expensive is the infrastructure and then how many phones do they have on the infrastructure. And the big question we had is how can Tempe encourage carriers to create partnerships to prevent this, what I call tower sprawl, or having a tower on every light pole. So the Wi-Fi status at Beach Park is we have 2 transceivers or access points is what we call them. One's located on the Middle Avenue Bridge, and that is fiber connected and then connects wirelessly to another location that's on the boathouse. I was out there during the P.F. Chang's race, and I was able to actually get a very good signal, do live streaming, and post some great pictures of me finishing the race. Ran into the mayor there. With no problems. And it actually reaches all the way from the bridge, the Mill Avenue Bridge, to the rail bridge. About 300 simultaneous connections with the current system, but of course that depends on the use. Obviously, as you get more video and information that requires more bandwidth, there's going to be fewer connections available. Right now, we haven't done any advertising, and we're averaging about 5 to 10 simultaneous users kind of throughout the day. And then when we had the recent festivals, the Inning Festival, there were about 50 people that found the connection, and they were actually able to live stream, get into social media, and text with the system. Right now we're coordinating with the communications staff and looking at how we're going to advertise the system to the public. But the good news is that the testing is complete, and this is actually a permanent installation, so it can remain in place in its current status. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the cellular system and what we're doing there. Information technology has a goal to connect every City of Tempe asset to fiber optic cable and to our conduit infrastructure. And those assets could be things like buildings and facilities like the library, traffic signals and those signal controllers, the cameras and the sensors, industrial water meters, well sites, sewer lift stations. But the most exciting part is probably those future smart city sensors and the infrastructure around that, which is actually going to require quite a bit of speed to be able to get the amount of data that those sensors can produce back to the city. What we've been trying to do is align our CIP projects. In other words, when we're going to put in a water line and open up a trench into the street, we want to align those projects with our own conduit projects because it is much cheaper to put conduit in the ground into an open trench than to cut into the pavement, put conduit in, and then close that up. And I think we talked a little bit about pavement quality. That seemed to be kind of a primary interest here tonight. So our idea is by aligning those projects with engineering, with water, with sewer, we just cut into the street once, place the conduit. We're going to place 2 conduits, one for city use and then one for future development. The other thing is we're trying to create partnerships. Like Real Road, we're placing conduit with engineering right now. We're sharing that with ASU, so looking at opportunities, also trying to meet with telecommunication vendors to see when they may be putting conduit in the ground and how can we partner with those opportunities. The final thing is leveraging those city-owned assets. By leveraging the conduit that's in the ground, we are pre-positioning our conduit for future development. So if we end up putting a high-rise in, we have that conduit in place, and so we don't have to rip the road out. Again, pavement quality, very important to IT. And it's also a valuable asset that can hopefully encourage faster adoption of 4 and 5G, those high-speed networks. So Tempe issued an RFP for telecommunication providers to assist with creating what we call a wireless master plan in public spaces. And the whole idea is to provide exceptional coverage and seamless service in the downtown urban core project area, which includes Mill Avenue and the Tempe Beach Park. We want to build the system at no cost to the city and explore possible revenue sharing opportunities with those vendors. The whole idea is to have what we call a neutral host vendor come in and build the infrastructure, and then they lease it to the 4 wireless providers, and that's how we end up getting either the no cost or possible revenue sharing opportunities. We're going to try to leverage our existing assets. So as I discussed, we have these conduits in place. We know that there's federal guidelines and government regulations around cellular towers that really can't prevent us from denying a tower in a right-of-way. However, Tempe can leverage our city-owned assets, those conduits in the ground, which are worth a lot to the telecommunications providers, to create a partnership. And we also know that Tempe-owned public spaces like Tempe Beach Park and Tempe Diablo Stadium, the cellular companies really can't go into those. Those aren't in the right-of-way. They're privately owned land. We did a focus on the urban core for this particular RFP, and the reason that we did is because it includes the Tempe Beach Park and also the future Novus Innovation Corridor. There's a high concentration of people, businesses, and we're trying to encourage that future development by utilizing that fiber. It's difficult to cover, and there's currently holes in the coverage. In other words, Tempe Beach Park doesn't have the greatest of coverage. And we also have the most city-owned assets in that particular area, so it's much easier to negotiate with the telecommunications providers. And then also we're looking to provide a seamless service between Arizona State University and City of Tempe. The other thing we're looking at is what I call digital equity, which is the cell phone companies are going to put towers where they get the most revenue. But by leveraging our city-owned assets and creating this partnership, we can ensure that there's cellular coverage to all neighborhoods in the urban core boundary, not just the areas of high revenue. So what are some of the opportunities? Is to encourage early adoption of 4 and 5G high-speed cellular in the downtown corridor. That's going to really be useful for smart cities. Remember that 4 and 5G requires a pretty dense antenna coverage. So about in the downtown corridor, about every 400 feet. If you think about that in 4 carriers, you could quickly have this tower sprawl, and basically every carrier would have a site on every street pole. By doing 1 pole that would host 2 to 4 carriers, we're going to cut the number of poles down. So I call it decluttering the downtown. The other thing we want them to do is to pull fiber in for city use. So pulling in fiber for smart poles or for Wi-Fi, sensors, digital interactive signage, and then the big key is having the vendor maintain all of that. We also encourage, as part of the RFP, for the vendors to think outside the box. What haven't we thought of, and what have they seen in the industry, and to propose some innovative ideas to encourage future growth. And then the final thing is we want to use this as a model and a template for the rest of the city. So what's the status of this right now is we are meeting with vendors and we're discussing the proposals and opportunities. The telecommunications subcommittee of the Technology Innovation Steering Committee, sorry, that was like a mouthful there, is reviewing the proposals. It's an active procurement, so I can't really share the details of that, but the final proposal and agreement will be brought to the city for your approval. We expect to wrap that up in probably the next 2 months. So future plans. We want to develop and implement this wireless master plan by building those partnerships with the telecommunication companies, and we want to provide as close to 100% coverage as we can, which would include the Tempe Beach Park or any public spaces. We want to capitalize on partnerships with telecommunication firms by sharing those assets and then increase the Wi-Fi coverage in Tempe parks. Although we can't control where the cell phone companies put their towers, by leveraging our assets, we are now involved in the process and can provide input on the process to prevent that the tower sprawl I was talking about. I think the big thing here is that for development, autonomous vehicles, phones, that smart city sensors I've talked about. Tempe will be laying the foundation for future innovation. It's just the beginning. We're going to start with the urban core, and then we want to try to deploy to the rest of the city. I was going to make this an hour, but.
Mark. Councilmember Adams?
Yes, good job, Mark, on this presentation. Very clear, and appreciate also not having to cut again the pavement after we just lay it down. So that saves a lot of money and a lot of hassle, and it also prevents traffic congestion. So thank you for thinking about that.
Councilman Granville?
Yeah, I feel like you're just a breath of fresh air, and I really appreciate it. The one thing, I love all of it. The thing I would add is right now, when you want to get on the city public Wi-Fi, in most of our city buildings, there's that little sign that says, you know, here's what it's called, here's the password. And there isn't really one like that down at Tempe Beach Park right now. And so maybe at the boathouse or someplace that you guys think is appropriate, just putting one or two of those, and I'm not saying a bunch, because you could maybe put one or two and just sort of see how it affects the network traffic, see how it affects users. But right now, you'd have to be pretty clever to be at Tempe Beach Park and know how to get on that network. And so maybe just like a little plastic sign with the information at the beach, at the boathouse would be the way to go to at least start, and then maybe a second location somewhere at some point.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Mark, thanks again for this presentation. I think it's great. I like the RFP that we're looking at doing through the city that you mentioned. I'm a little concerned about only 50 people were able to be connected in East Fester, considering how many people were there. What was the reason for that, the rationale?
We believe that the rationale is that there's a password. We didn't do any kind of advertising for it. So they would have to know it was there in order to be able to connect. So we were still in that testing mode, but now that we're out of the testing mode, definitely we will get that word out with signage and press release.
Thank you. Yes, Vice Mayor.
So do we need to have it be password protected because of security, cybersecurity issues, or could there be a password that doesn't change so people get to know the password and don't have to look for a new password every month?
We originally did that at the library because of the capacity of the system. And what was happening to us is that if you had previously connected to the system, that you would automatically connect and your phone would switch over. And we were basically oversubscribing the system. And so we created the password for that reason, is to actually control just the number of people that are on the system. But we could certainly look at what it would take to expand the system. Councilmember Granville.
Jump in for a second? Yeah. He's being very kind and very diplomatic. What was happening is most cell phones now, even though you don't know it, are programmed to use a cell phone if it has it, but use Wi-Fi, switch automatically to Wi-Fi even if you don't know you've switched, if there's a public open Wi-Fi. And so the problem that they were having at the library, which I brought to their attention, they quickly fixed, was that hundreds of people come to the library with cell phones who just have it sitting in their pocket. And their cell phone immediately starts in the background downloading all of the app updates and downloading a whole bunch of stuff that they don't even know or care about at that particular moment. And so they might have 1,000 people who don't even know they're on the Wi-Fi network. And then when the one person did want to get on purpose, they were finding that they were out of IP addresses. And so they were just, they added the password to create intention.
Does it have to be a monthly change to the password, though?
It was originally monthly, and we changed it to every 3 months or quarterly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Next item is future agenda items. Anybody have anything? Future IRS? Seeing none, we're going to go right into the committee of the whole items. Members of the audience have up to 3 minutes to discuss any of the matters listed on committee of the whole. I do not have any cards. Anyone in the audience wishing to address us, could you get my attention? Yes, ma'am. Please come forward. State your name and place of residence for the record.
Hi, my name is Kate Ham, and I live in Tempe. I live near Clark Park, closer to Gilliland, actually. So I came here tonight because I'm very grateful that Shauna Warner had sent out the notification to our neighborhood that you were discussing the pool tonight, and I want to thank the people who came to the park, and we got to offer our feedback and our suggestions, and they were very wonderful about taking all those. So I also just wanted to continue. I want to thank you for, it sounds like you're going in the direction where you are going to put the pool, because I did this, I think I was here 5 or 6 years ago talking about the same thing. So I appreciate your comments about, we've been talking about this, if not now, when, and it seems like a good time. And just to address a couple of the comments, the one about the parking and being able to walk to the pool. And so, of course, I live closer to Gilliland, so I wouldn't really technically walk to Clark Pool, but the Orbit route goes right by there. And I think that's a feasible option for a lot of families. And I know that my kids use the Orbit. They use the free city bus passes. I mean, there are lots of, options besides parking. And there is parking, on the Roosevelt side for now. And there was some street parking. So that's just one thing I wanted to point out was the Orbit. And that, and then in looking at the map, my kids were 4, 5, and 6 when we moved to that neighborhood. And so all those years I'd see that pool just sitting there, and it was so frustrating. And so I would drive to, in our backyard, we don't have a pool. So I drove, 5 miles to Escalante every day, and we did the swim team, and we did sort of lessons and then swim team, and then my kids have gone through junior lifeguarding, and now they're like, 14, 15, and 16. So they're not, but they can still, now I've got junior lifeguards and lifeguards. So I know this pool probably won't happen when my kids are at home with me, but I highly support it because, I'll stay in the neighborhood, and for all the other kids who are moving back in our neighborhood, the revitalization of Clark Park and our little league, which I'm part of, which opening day Saturday. Yeah. So I just want to say thank you so much for your comments and your support of the park and the neighborhood, especially with the map that they kept showing. It's so apparent that there's no pool there. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience wishing to address us? See none, I'll close that portion. Next item is adaptive parks and recreation. I will.
Turn over to me. Cool.
Councilmember
Thank you, Mayor.
Hernandez
Yeah,
Savage.
thank you very much. I just want to thank, I hope you guys will indulge us a little bit, because I know normally when we bring things back, we don't really do a presentation, but when we're talking about adaptive rec, and it does get a little complicated, we thought it'd be really great to have those individuals that are actually on the ground doing the work with our residents and our families, and trying to really understand the evolution of our program. And I'll have to say our evolution of our program has been fairly slight. So I can actually tell you, we were going through some of the numbers in regards to what we're doing with adaptive rec. And if you remember, this working group started, we were talking about working on accessibility to our parks, and we were talking about inclusive equipment in our parks, and we created a really great the Tempe Inclusive Playground Guide, which now is used throughout the whole city with our neighborhood parks and our community parks. And this was an evolution of learning, like, what are we doing now for recreation? What have we been doing? What do we want to do? And what can we do in the future? So I think one of the biggest concerns is the fact that we really haven't had the opportunity to have capacity to grow the program, that we have been fairly stagnant. And this group of individuals has continued to excel and create a really quality program with less. It's very amazing. We went back and looked at the numbers, and in 2009, the O&M and the wages budget were $66,000, and today they're $68,000. So I think it just kind of goes to show that this is maybe kind of one of the areas that's actually been in the supplemental for the last 3 years, and it has not been funded, and something that I think we really need to pay attention to. So we've asked them to come and just give us a quick overview of some of the work that this working group has done. They've worked really, really hard. You see the staff members that were involved, but I will tell you all the 3 school districts were actually at the table too. We had Wendy Dietrich, who is the chair from the Mayor's Disability Commission. She was also part of the working group. So it was a really great collaborative group. all wanting the same thing, to see how we can better serve our residents. And if you know from the community survey that the respondents said 18% of them have somebody in their household that has a disability. And that's a pretty growing number. So I think that's, you know, what I would just wanted to say to kind of frame things up for these guys and just say thank you to everyone that's really put in a lot of work, and especially thanks to the vice mayor for being there and for you guys. So with that, I'll let these Kelly and Jeremy and Samantha take it away. So you might want to introduce everybody. I'm not sure if okay.
Mayor, my name is Kelly, and the council, my name is Kelly Rafferty. I'm Community Service Manager for Recreation. With me tonight is Jeremy King, Community Services Supervisor for Kids Zone. And also we got Samantha Mason, who's our Adaptive Recreation Coordinator.
So, good evening. Adapted Recreation has some amazing programs for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities or those with IDD. Programs we offer are Special Olympics, where we have 8 sports year-long for those 8 years old and up. Our Friday night social activities happen the first 2 Fridays of every month, and our activities include but are not limited to dances, bingos, and of course a good night of karaoke. Our LEAP program is an after-school program for those in middle school and high school, while our Camp Challenge program is an 8-week summer program for those who are 5 to 21 years old. Some adapted classes we offer are adapted Zumba and kayaking. And then Kids Zone is a before and after school program for children with and without IDD who are in pre-K through 8th grade, giving our community a mainstream setting experience for their children. Some challenges we both face in serving those with IDD are a lack of space, the continuous growing wait list, specific trainings to serve a population who have very specific needs, following the state mandated ratios of 1:4, and limited funding. LEAP, which stands for Life Skills Enrichment After School Program. We currently serve 20 people with IDD in our program with a growing wait list. We are the only after-school program in the city of Tempe that serves those with IDD at a 1:4 ratio. While there are 2,600 students in Tempe alone that identify with a disability, between our 3 programs, Camp Challenge, LEAP, and Kids Zone, we only serve about 150 of those. Camp Challenge currently serves 75 children with IDD, with well over 25 individuals on the wait list for the summer program. Camp Challenge provides a 6-hour day, while most city summer programs only provide a 4-hour day. Camp Challenge fosters social inclusion, confidence, and cooperation with peers in a setting where they feel comfortable to be themselves. Kids Zone is currently serving 50 children with self-disclosed disabilities. Kids Zone provides a state and national accredited requirement of a 1:12 ratio, while these children with IDD are successful in a 1:4 ratio. These environments are creating struggles for this program and struggles for those with IDD that we as a city are trying to serve.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor. Sorry. It's on. We also looked as a working group to focus on the inclusion in our current city programs. Although programs have always been inclusive, the new inclusion form improves the ease of the inclusion requests. The new form can be filled out online for any reasonable accommodation, and it also centralizes the process for our department so that we can track future numbers and types of requests that are made. We also looked at determining a more targeted training approach, specifically for those full and part-time staff who work directly with the youth and adults and providing the direct service. Tempe Elementary and Tempe High School District agreed to partner with those trainings along with raising community awareness and sustain the growth of our programs. For example, today is 3/21, which represents National Down Syndrome Day, representing the extra 21st chromosome. So some good awareness for today. Finally, we want to look at expanding programming. With city funding, we would have the ability to increase year-round participation of individuals with IDD through participation in Camp Challenge, LEAP programs, Kid Zones, classes and activities offered through community services, and increase and improve the training we discussed for our staff to better serve the needs of the participants in the community.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank, obviously, Councilman Ardano Savage, Councilman Keating, and Vice Mayor Kuby for working on this. I think you guys did it was a great presentation. I really think it's phenomenal. And I know we have many organizations in Tempe, because that's how Tempe is, that cater to this. Well, you know, they have centers for rehabilitation, we have the ARC, and I know that they were included in this process, which I think is great to the stakeholder output and outreach. I want to encourage you to continue to find other partnerships that can help benefit from this. And I think this really helps define who we are as a community, because we care. I can't thank you guys enough for working on this and thinking outside the box, really, to come up with certain programs. Thank you guys. Vice Mayor?
So I just want to salute Robin Ardano Savage, council member. Your leadership was amazing on this whole working group from beginning to end, or maybe we're just still in the middle. But you brought together staff and integrated staff from all over, so many different departments, and the school districts and nonprofits and developmentally delayed community. I was there along for the ride. So thank you so much for your leadership. And I think you really come up with a stellar product. And staff, thank you so much.
Councilmember Adams, then Councilman Granville.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It was a really good job. Also, I want to point out that Kid Zone for decades now, has been an award-winning national program. So hats off to Jill, who's here today, and the staff for doing such a great job and providing these necessary resources. And I sure would like to see what we can do to increase the numbers and lower the wait lists.
Councilman Granville.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who didn't think this was a worthwhile thing. You'd have to be kind of crazy. The thing that I was a little confused on, and maybe you can clarify, is I'm a little confused on the ask. So right now, our annual budget is something like $65,000 a year. I think this is talking about changing that annual budget to about $480,000 a year. My first question is that a correct understanding of the ask financial-wise, or am I misunderstanding it? And the other one is what's assuming that it sounds like we all agree, what's the process of how that gets integrated into our sort of larger discussion?
I'll answer that. And I don't want
you.
to put these guys on the spot either, but you know, we really respect the process, our budget process. And so really what we're asking is, you're right, the reason why we did this is because we wanted to make sure it got done before the budget so they could put in a supplemental request. And it is my understanding there is going to be a supplemental request, and we just really asked for the highest consideration. I mean, that's all we can do. We believe this is something that's really important, and I couldn't be more proud of everybody that sat around that table, because this was really, truly a collaborative effort, and everybody worked really hard. There was a lot of compromise, a lot of ideas to be able to come together to say, you know, what do we need to do to serve more of our community?
I'm 100% on board with that. I just wasn't sure what our next step was.
That's it.
Yeah, no, then absolutely. I think it should get in that process, and I imagine it'll do very well.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback really quick on what Lauren said in regards to the vice mayor about this not being the end. I actually had the opportunity, and Wendy's not here tonight, but one of the things that we kind of pondered was the idea of calling it adaptive rec versus inclusive recreation. I mean, that term kind of seems to go back and forth, and I know the mayor brought that up, and so Wendy kind of offered and said, you know, what about maybe moving forward, but really talking to the community, working with the different stakeholders, and try to identify what an inclusive community means to them. And the Disability Commission are very willing to take on that task. They would love to do it along with our diversity department if that's some direction that we could give them. I mean, I think it would be great and a great challenge for them, and then kind of see how that works moving forward to really just identify some of those key things that make us inclusive and what they see us being an inclusive community, if you guys are all right with that. Yeah? All right, good. I just want to say thanks to you guys being up here. Samantha, Jeremy, Kelly, I really do appreciate you taking the time. And to the working group that's not here, you guys really, you made it happen. Thank you.
Next is our arterial, excuse me, arterial right-of-way walls. Councilman Navarro.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to go ahead and start this presentation. It's probably just going to be me up here. For the last 8 years, I think this is one of the things that actually, a long time before that, is what I was campaigning on. The look and feel of our right-of-ways, the look and feel of our parks, the entryways into our neighborhoods, the investment that we make in our parks to help encourage homeowners to invest in their homes. And I think this is the addition to that. And what we're looking at is we have aging right-of-way walls. And just to be clear, the walls I'm talking about are the walls on major thoroughways within our cities, our Rural Road or Southern Broadway, whatever it may be. Broadway Road is a perfect example of a wall that was recently constructed and looks gorgeous for that neighborhood. But we do have areas in the community where our walls are falling apart. And as it is right now, the people that butt up against these major roads, they are by code just to have a barrier that is something of sturdiness and that you cannot get into the yard. It can be anything with just a variety of different brick placement that does not coordinate with the existing properties to plywood that is sturdy, and that's it. And that's all they have to do. So this has been a project that has sure has had a lot of twists and a lot of discussions about, in fact, discussions over a course of several years with neighborhood groups, coffee talks with me, and even through our community surveys, we've talked about the quality of our neighborhoods. We talked about what our neighborhoods look like, our streets, our right-of-ways, and our right-of-way walls. And even through the surveys that we've seen and we've cited from this, our citizens would like to have this as a part of a project that the city should consider. And what I'm trying to address, and Chandler has already achieved this, is replacing old existing walls with newer walls. I used the corner of McClintock and Guadalupe as one of the cases where in the past we did somewhat of a 50-50 split with the homeowners within that area. They had these slided Continental Home panels that were falling over, and they were a hazard. There are some walls within this picture that are up into that grade. They're starting to lean into our right-of-ways to where they could fall over into our right-of-ways. In fact, there's actually been a tree that has collapsed in a yard and pushed the wall into our right-of-ways. It's not in one of these pictures. But the long and short of it is, it's up to the homeowner to do whatever they want to do. And when they do that, it deteriorates the look and feel of their neighborhood. It starts to degrade what our neighborhoods are all about. And it starts to degrade the quality of the city. And I think Tempe has to invest, in my opinion. And there's a couple ways we possibly could do it, and I'm going to cite, I probably prefer one of the ways. But long and short of it, I think this is an area that we're seeing other cities invest in. Like I said, Chandler's investing in it. Now, Gilbert is also have a mandate that if they feel that their right-of-way walls or these owners are not keeping their walls up, they will come in and do a 50-50 split with them to get their walls up to code to what their codes are. Glendale is now implementing some of the same procedures or a process to improve their right-of-way walls in their aging community also. And the long and short of it is, and we can see Chandler, they just completed a section, I believe, over on Ray Road between Rural and McClintock. And the wall that they put up is a wall that also muffles the sound. It also has benefits to the neighbors that are directly behind it. But in addition, it also increases the view and the quality of the neighborhood. Like I said, we're investing in parks, we're investing in streets, we're investing in right-of-ways because I think it's important that we show that our city is not deteriorating. We have a city that is actually doing magnificent things in our downtown area, but we need to see these benefits in our neighborhoods. Tonight we've asked about additional money or cutting money in funds to help support programs, and I tell you what, this council, either I disagree or I like or whatever, we always continue to push to make our city better. We always continue to push to make programs better because we have to. And we have to make a hard decision on what we can fund and what we can fund right now. And all I'm asking is this, is that we look at an investment in our right-of-way walls. And the option I'm looking at is the city will construct and maintain a wall and try to tie it in to the existing neighbors. The neighbors would then, and we've worked it out with legal, have to sign an agreement that you can tie into our wall, but that is now the city's wall. Issues and topics have been, or discussions have been brought up, well, we're gonna have to maintain it and all sort of stuff that could be an added cost. When I look across the street at the Continental Homes, the wall's been up for about 30 years. Still looks great, still looks great. So I'm talking about an investment that'll probably last about 40 years, possibly, maybe longer. Then we probably would have to do something to replace it. But the quality of the wall, just like we're seeing here in Chandler, will probably stand, you know, a real test of time. And it will look great. And it's an investment in our community. There might be little particulars that we'd have to address to figure out how this will go down, but I need to see if the council feels that this is an investment that will help our city, help the quality of our city achieve to the next level, because I think it's important. I'm willing to start off with neighborhoods that have 3 or more existing houses tied into a wall, so there's going to be discussions, and I'll leave it up to that, but there are houses that just have their own wall. I think that we start with the neighborhoods, Suggs, Continental, all those neighborhoods that were master planned, that were not, as we have in South Tempe, where those master plans, they take care of those right-of-way walls. We have small areas throughout the middle core and northern part of our city that were not obligated with that agreement with the city. This way, we can start off with a process of taking care of those types of properties with 3 or more consecutive houses that have the continuous wall. I think that it's important, I know that we talked about the CIP budget, but I think it's important to maybe start throwing this in either the 5th or even the 6th year, but it has to be in our CIP. And it has to be invested in. And I'm considering it starting off with $500,000 per year for 5 years to see how the process goes, to let another council decide to increase it or to do away with it. But I really do believe that this has to be put in our CIP, and I'm just eager for any questions.
Thank you. I think, I mean, you know how I feel about right-of-ways and landscaping. I hear it all the time from a particular person that's close to me about what we need to do. My father, he constantly says, "Oh, we got to fix this. We got to look at this." And I agree with you, Councilman Navarro. I think the right-of-ways, there was a great program on Guadalupe and McClintock, went all the way to Price Road. We had that program in place. I think it was a federal grant, actually. If I remember, we paid half of it, like you mentioned. One of the things I think, I mean, it is important, but listening to our CIP budget, how would we fund this?
Once again, Mark, that's why I wanted to try to either throw it in the 5th or the 6th year, because I think that it is a decision on if we're going to fund it or not. So I'm asking the council straight out, do you feel that this is important for our community to have the look and feel of what the city of Tempe is all about, or do you feel that our right-of-way walls, our owners, which I could throw another program out where we can try to do a bulk purchase program to try to encourage these homeowners, which are homeowners that probably live in California that are renting these properties out, that might opt into a program, but knowing that they still have to pay cash to get the program going? Or do we invest in something that we feel is a need for the city, for the look and feel and the character of what Tempe is all about? So that's my question.
I do like the bulk buying program. I think that'd be something that should be looked at. Councilman Keating, the Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, I'd like to thank Councilmember Navarro for bringing this forward. You know, living in the area that would be affected by this, you know, I do think it's something that is needed, and I do not have an issue with throwing it on to the 5th or 6th year of our CIP and letting it compete. And, you know, we'll see if this future council wants to, you know, give give or take away funding from it, but it is something that I think is a value to our community. Our residents would appreciate it. So, why not toss it in the ring and see what comes up.
Vice Mayor?
I agree with Councilmember Keating and Councilmember Navarro. Really appreciate you identifying this, and it's not just your passion. You have a lot of expertise and have really discussed this issue so many times on council. I have a question though. Have the hotspots been identified, or is there mapping that has been done with this project?
Yeah, there has been mapping done, in fact, I think several years back, where there's more of a critical need that would start and then continue on from there. But as they continue on with the certain hotspots, they're already finding, the deterioration of the walls coming from the bottom due to, we actually had existing in our right-of-ways grass at one time that deteriorated those walls, in addition to just the time. But we have identified those areas, and like I said, the areas, if you think about it, it's not a large group of area, considering that if this program is over a course of 5 years and just using certain criteria, only certain areas would get it for the first wave, and this program was to continue on, then there would be the other criteria.
And another question, would homeowner associations be eligible?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Yes, no, homeowner associations actually have an agreement with the cities to maintain their own walls, so they actually would not be part of it.
And then the last thing, would there be an opportunity maybe to have some data be crowdsourced where people could report in on it, and maybe through a 311 or in another way, and report in areas that are in need of walls?
Definitely could use that, for sure.
Thanks so much.
Councilmember Adams and Councilmember Granville.
Yes, I think the walls really affect the community and how it looks, and I think that's really important. It also affects people's home values, which should be taken into consideration. And I know that tonight we went from 6 million to 3 million in the payment quality index, and I'm wondering if maybe we could put in 500,000 a year and work on improving these walls. I think it's a very important program and really will change the feel of the city.
Councilman Granville?
Yeah, so I remember when I first got on council, Councilmember Navarro, and we were on a neighborhood committee, you were even talking about this then. I mean, it's been a long time coming. And I'm not, it sounds like there's consensus to do this, so I'm not disappointed I'm going to get out sort of consensus on this one, because it's a good program. I think I just have the ideological struggle with this. And that is that what we're saying is if you buy something and you can't afford to maintain it, but it looks bad publicly, we'll step in and fix it for you. And I think that's a scary thing to say. I mean, so for example, if we're looking at this photo, a bad wall here would make the neighborhood look trashy, but so would a poorly maintained roof, and so would a bad air conditioning unit. And we're not going to go and fix their roof, and we're not going to go fix their air conditioning unit. And so I don't disagree that it will add value and beautify the community, but ideologically, I just struggle with picking up somebody else's slack just because it happens to be in a public right-of-way.
Right, I appreciate your comments.
I would support the bulk buying program for sure.
Right, I appreciate your comments, but to that point, that's the whole catch is you're going to get an inconsistency of the wall, especially in the bulk buying process, because you might get one neighbor to opt in on it and another not opting in on it or just doing whatever they want. Keep in mind, our code is you just have to have a barrier to prevent any entry that's sturdy enough. So it could be virtually anything. The goal of this is to, I'm not going to be able to correct every house, and this is not for neighborhood streets or anything. It's for our entryway, our major right-of-ways. And it's not only for, just the residents to hopefully take some more pride in what we're investing into their community, like we do into their parks, but it's also the character of Tempe. It's also the character of the look and feel of what we're all about. We ask ASU and we ask ourselves to make some grand entryways within our cities to separate ourselves from Phoenix, Scottsdale, Mesa, Chandler. This is one of the things in my mind that helps us separate ourselves, because we're taking care of Tempe residents, or we're taking care of our community, and we're trying to keep it up. we're showing a great downtown, and how we embrace that. We're putting that investment into our neighborhoods is what I'm trying to act. And sure, it's going to be a tough decision because it has to compete with the CIP, but I'm saying put it in there and let it compete. And I think it's a good program.
We agree.
Move forward for year 5, if it is, but then what would that look like, Ken? It's just got to compete?
Let staff figure it out.
Okay. I think it's a good program, but
The CIP we've been talking about tonight is years 1 through 5. So if you want to add it to compete, we're rushing to get to the next meeting to come back to you with the changes made tonight. What do you want us to do? To score it against the...
We don't have 6.
In this current year, you want us to...
Start with 5 and let it compete after that.
I mean, if it gets added, $500,000 a year for 5 years, we're talking about another $2.5 million that we're going to have to find to take out of the green.
But over the course of the following 5 years, not the current 5 years.
If it's in year 5, that's
5.
2. Oh, you're saying starting
year 5.
500,000 in year 5.
Yeah.
I got you. So if you want it to compete this year, well, I don't know what you want us to do. Do you want us to score it like we scored the other ones and come back to you and tell you what the score was?
That'd probably be appropriate.
That'd be appropriate.
As that I understand then, is there a write-up of what the program is?
That's a proposal for year 5 of the CIP, not year 1, 2, 3, or 4.
No. Year 5, 500,000 only.
Right.
Right.
And either is it through an agree or through, like Councilmember Adams said, if we're talking about the PQI and we're talking about fudging those numbers, maybe that's an added to help that program start.
So this is somewhat new. So help me out.
Okay.
If we have a project that is a city building that we have cut funding because we don't have enough to fully maintain that building, for example, Vial building, the Vial is in need of repairs, we don't have enough funding, are you suggesting that we compete against it with a privately owned wall?
So I'm suggesting we compete against it. If it does not make the competition.
No, we don't have a score for privately owned infrastructure.
Right. Then this is where staff is going to have to come up with, and I'm asking staff, because I've gone through a process through staff of either we're doing this or we're not doing this. I haven't gotten really a lot of help on this project is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I've had some members that have wanted to help on this, and I've had a lot of people that have actually kind of, just throw it away. Let's push it out. That's why it's taken maybe about 8 years to get this thing done.
We would own the wall at that point, though. I'm asking questions so that we can score it. So at the point that we install it would be our wall?
Yes.
Okay, that helps.
Okay. All right. Next item is new items for council consideration, county islands. Ms. Adams?
Yes, the county island is approximately 78 acres, and I'm talking about the county island that is north of the 202 to Curry Road from rural to McClintock, and it's 78 acres. Many of the Tempeans are frustrated with the poor conditions of the county island, and I agree with them, and I would like us to explore other options for the county island. And Councilmember Navarro and Keating are joining me on this future committee.
I appreciate the desire. I think this is something we talked about. Actually, met with a developer this week about if they were considering annexing it in. And I know there's a lot of costs associated with it. And I think staff has done some lead work already because this conversation has been going on. I mean, that's fine if you want to have a working group. I think it's more of a 7 of us because it's such a big piece of land. And I think it would be helpful if you could, I think staff may have it, if you could ask staff to figure out what the cost would be just for the infrastructure alone. Because normally, the last county island I think that we incorporated was Tempe Marketplace. And we worked with the private side where they assembled all the land together. And then as a part of a development agreement, they developed the infrastructure, the sewer, because they all have to be connected to the city at some point with the roads, the sidewalks, and because then they have to be up the ADA standards that we talked about tonight on some of our CIP stuff to our standards. So I think if staff could come back to the council, if you want to keep it to 3 of you, that's fine. I would suggest the whole council though, because it is such a large area. But I think once you see what the costs are, because we're talking about costs all night, there's a lot to do with the infrastructure costs that we don't have anywhere in the budget. But I'm not opposed to trying to work with private developers, because I know that they have been trying for years and they still, and I just met with one today from Lee and Associates, or not today, earlier this week on that area. And it's hard for them to get 50 plus 1% of the agreed to landowners in that area. But I'm open to it. I think it's something we want it. And let me tell you, the county tells us they want to just give it to us. That's great. But nothing's for free. So when they give something to us, it's going to have to be costs associated with roads and infrastructure and so forth.
Yes, and that's why we wanted to do the working group first, a small working group, and get information from staff and work through it for a while, and then bring it back to council.
Okay.
Mayor, just to add on. Yeah, I just, just out of curiosity, because it's been years since we've kind of talked about this and really had an idea what is this all about. I think just getting the information and finding out what we can do.
Okay,
Awesome.
sounds good.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Next is items in progress. Anybody have anything? Vice Mayor?
Did you want to go? So I just wanted to give council a brief update on the short-term rentals working group that Councilmember Navarro and I are on. And as you recall, the working group came about because of residents' concern and staff concern about the negative impacts within our neighborhoods from short-term rentals, Airbnbs. And one particular neighborhood, it's just a boarding house is pretty much taking over the street, causing a lot of trouble and also just posing a threat, an existential threat to that particular neighborhood. So unfortunately, as they like to do, the state legislature passed laws restricting the city's abilities to regulate online lodging and short-term vacation rentals. And those limits are in place still, but there's some cause for hope, some limited hope. And the working group is watching two relevant bills in the legislature. They're making their way through the legislature. And the Arizona League of Cities and Towns has taken the lead in, on the issue and supporting, in particular, one bill, HB 2672. And it gives some enforcement tools back to the city, gives some measure, a limited measure of local control back to the city on short-term vacation rentals. What it does is it requires mandatory contact information so that problems can be addressed in a timely fashion, so contact information from the property, and then escalating fines for repeat wrongdoing. It gives us the tools to do that. So it's passed out of the House, it's assigned to the Senate, we're hopeful for a passage. And then there's HB 2027, and that makes a little correction with Department of Revenue that allows us to tax the online marketplace. So it'll impose hotel taxes onto short-term rentals, which is a good thing to do for equity and considering hotels have to pay that tax, why shouldn't these Airbnbs have to? And that bill passed the House unanimously and passed out of the Senate Finance Committee. So there's great hope for that bill as well. Both bills will help address some of the residents' concerns. So we're watching closely. We have high hopes, even though we realize maybe this isn't exactly everything we'd want to have. And the working group is currently on hold until the bills have run their course, and then Joel and I will reconvene with staff to talk about what comes next, and including some possible code changes that fire and community development are crafting. So just wanted to give you that update and let you know there's hope is on the way. It's not everything we want, but there's some good news there.
Anyone else? Have any updates, Councilmember Keating?
I'd like to know what's so funny.
No, with the paper.
Am I doing this?
That's the microphone. All right, nothing else. I just want to thank, congratulations, Arizona State got into the play-in game. They play tomorrow night or tomorrow afternoon against Buffalo. With that, I will see. We will adjourn the meeting. I just want to recognize that we have, and I know Ms. Ham mentioned it, but we have the Little League opening this weekend. It'd be great for everyone to get out there for that. And with that, we are adjourned. Great. Mr. Manager, do you have any announcements?
Say, this is the 3rd-year anniversary of the appointment of Chief Moyer to the Tempe PD. Thank you for your service.
All right. With that, we're adjourned.